is June 5th, 1993. You also might want to add, today is Joan's birthday. Blue Diver's Life. Today is June 5th, 1993. You also might want to add, today is Jordan's birthday. He's a decade today.
It's also the 10-year and one-day anniversary of my graduation from law school.
Okay. So, Dad, before we start, Dad wants to talk a little bit about some of the things he wants to clear up that were on the first tape.
The first tape was taken almost 2.5 years ago.
Oh, you have to blab that now.
And I want to clear up some of the things that were in it, not necessarily misunderstanding. But for one thing, what I have said in the past was my version. If Carolyn and Elizabeth were to comment, their version would be different. Maybe not too much, but it would be different. Now, I'd like to state that Carolyn was the studious type, and her friends were very sophisticated and more on the smart side, whereas Elizabeth and I would play with kids our own age, most of them of foreign parentage, and as far as studies and classwork goes, that was not a topic of conversation with us.
When you say foreign, you mean like most of European, right?
European, yes.
Italian, Polish.
Most Italians and Poles and Czechs.
Mm-hmm.
And keep interrupting me, that's good.
I thought you would be more of a, weren't you more of a mixo studious too? Didn't you pick the books? And...
not in grammar school.
Oh.
In grammar school, I was a kid.
That's good.
Now, to continue, with reference to the Black Ball Boy Scout installation, I don't want any misunderstanding, because before we ever took a vote, Art Helmer would explain to us that we should ignore any personal dislikes, any prejudices, poverty, or anything that was related to anything other than a man's character, companionship, morals, honesty, and so forth, That is what mattered. Now, in the small town of South Plainfield, we had a Boy Scout troop of only around 30 members. There were no more than 10 Jewish families in that town, and we had 5 Jewish boys in our troop. There were, as far as I know, only 2 black families, and we had 1 black boy. And again, as far as I know, no one was ever blackballed. I don't think I mentioned the little jobs that I had while I was in grammar school and in high school. I used to weed a driveway for a neighbor in my little cart. I used to cart ashes and rubbish out of the basement for another neighbor. I picked strawberries on the farm, huckleberries, raspberries, and beans. And on Sundays, I would help a man deliver newspapers. And if I ever caught any of my kids doing what I would do, I would bash them. He had a big touring car, and I would hang on the side, and when we'd come to a house, I'd grab a paper, jump off, drop the paper on the porch, come back, jump on a running car, on a running board.
Dangerous.
Cars had running boards in those days.
Very dangerous, then.
Now, I also don't want to leave the impression that I was a goody-goody or a model. Not far from it, but I misbehaved. I ducked duties. I made excuses, just like any kid would do. But
Sure, now you tell us.
now I tell you. But I got my share of reprimands, but I was obedient, and I never yielded to peer power. Now, as a caddy, I was always one of the last caddies out with several caddy masters. And one caddy master in particular would always keep me and another fellow, a black boy, Bill Henry, before one of the last ones out. And Bill Henry and I never realized this until later on I met him while playing golf. The reason he did this was that Bill Henry and I were always dressed nice, and our language was good, and we were clean kids. And whenever Plainfield Country Club would get a member up there, I guess they wanted to show off the caddy force and the club, so he would save us for them, and consequently we wouldn't get the good breaks. And then later on, when they got another caddy master, I was always one of the last ones out, because this caddy master used to sell pie and soda on credit, and you would pay him after you came back from a round of golf. And I refused to submit to that. Now, let's see, there may be only a few other little items that wasn't said. Oh yes, as kids, that's Carolyn, Elizabeth, and I, and some of the kids in the neighborhood would love to hear stories. Remember, we had no television, we had no radio. We loved to talk about, repeat fables that we heard in school, mottos. We would sing all the popular songs. We would mimic other kids, and we would repeat rhymes and sayings, slang, and make fun about all the other kids. And then I do want to repeat that Art Helmer was a great influence on all the boys. He was like a second father to everyone. And we lived the Boy Scout oath and the Boy Scout deed, and somehow I think it's left a guideline with me that still exists today. And then, of course, there was the church. We had a wonderful priest, Father Baldwin, and he was particularly youth-oriented. He would always see that we had baseballs, bats, and he would come out, and while he wouldn't umpire a game, but he would always be there. And after school, he would organize little things. So I can't dismiss the importance of our little church in South Plainfield. Joyce, now you can go on.
All right, let's just stop it a minute to make sure it's going up. I don't see the red light.
Right after graduation.
Okay, you're on.
Okay, Dad. Well, we want to start now with my part of the interview is right after you graduated college. I guess this would bring us up to around high school. I'm sorry. Yeah, you wish, right? This would bring us up to around 1933. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what was happening. This was pre-World War I. What was happening politically, certainly intermingled with what was happening in your life, too.
Well, let me start. Right after I graduated, you're supposed to go job hunting. Well, there were no jobs.
Now, how long after the Depression was this?
The Depression didn't stop until World War II
Okay,
started.
so we're right in the middle of it, right? The Depression.
This is 1933,
Okay.
and this was the worst part of the Depression.
What year did the Depression start?
1929,
Okay.
with the stock market crash, and we went all through high school with the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1933, when we graduated, there were absolutely no jobs. So the first job I wanted to caddy every day of the week, but they wouldn't allow me to caddy because they had what they called weekday caddies. These are men that caddy whenever the golf course was open, and they didn't want the schoolboys to take any time away from them. So I was only allowed to caddy on weekends.
How much did you make for caddying?
We used to get $1 a round plus a quarter a tip. And it was very difficult to get out because during the week only certain members would play. So that right after high school, I couldn't even get a job on the farm because that was all taken by steady. So I just waited. In fact, I was ready to join the CCC. That's the Conservation Corps. It's like a training camp.
Uh-huh.
You would go out and you would clean the forest, you would build roads, you would build dams, and do all outdoor work. But during that summer, that was I played a lot of baseball. They had a morning league in one of the parks, and then there were 2 or 3 teams that I played with 1 or 2 nights a week, and it was just a complete waste of time. Then out of the clear, Mike Kafka sent for me. They had an opening in the Liberty Theater. Keep asking me questions.
I am.
And I got a job there as my prime duty was a ticket collector. Ticket collector is higher than an usher.
Tell us where the Liberty Theater is.
But
Dad, tell us where the Liberty Theater is.
the Liberty Theater, 434 West Front Street, Plainfield, New Jersey. You wouldn't recognize it now. But then, it was the only movie house in Plainfield that had air conditioning. And they used to advertise as the coolest spot in town. Well,
that was probably hot.
and anyway, I had to wear a uniform, and they were very fussy with the uniform. You have a clean shirt, and you have the old starch.
You have to have one of those little hats.
No hats, because I was inside. You have starched collars, and your uniform had to be pressed. They gave you the uniform, but the maintenance was on you. And then not only did I collect, and incidentally, collecting tickets at that time was a glamorous job.
So I bet.
Because that was the main place of entertainment for adults and
And all the people you got to meet.
people I got to meet. I got to meet every policeman, every fireman, the mayor. They would all come in, and they would come in with badges, and you let them in. And
I think we should say, too, that just remember that 1933, what a source of entertainment movies were for people, because there was no TV.
and radio was just getting into
Right,
it
so this was the
on
main-
its own. It was the main. It was the main source of entertainment, and we charged 25 cents to get in. The Strand, the Paramount, charged 40 cents. And
What were some of the movies that were popular then, if you can remember?
Footlight Parade, the Footlight Parade, I've got that down here somewhere. Footlight Parade, 42nd Street, Flotation Walk, A Big Broadcast, Prisoner of Shark Islands, Marx Brothers, Sonia Henney, Stagecoach, Mutiny on the Bounty, Ninotchka, and all the James Cagney, Pat O'Brien films.
And how much was your salary at the time?
I started out $12 a week. Then I got a raise of $14 a week when the NRA came in. That was when President Roosevelt started the National Recovery Act. Then it was declared unconstitutional. Oh, was I mad, because I got a $2 cut.
Oh, my goodness. They actually could give you a pay cut at that time?
They could give you a pay cut, and not only that, you got no sick leave, no vacation, and in the 3.5 years I worked at the Liberty,
No medical insurance,
no
right?
medical insurance, no unemployment. I was sick only, I think, one day, and I got doctor day's pay.
Gee.
Well, that was the custom then, and you just went along with it. You didn't expect anything else. But my duties, in addition to
Now,
collecting,
is this pre-television?
Yeah.
long
Yeah,
before,
Joan,
in addition to collecting tickets,
Well, I just wanted it on the film.
we had spoken about that.
as I said, collecting tickets was the glamorous part of it, but there was some that wasn't. I had to clean up. I was a janitor for one day a week, a full-time, janitor up until the theater opened. That's clean the whole theater.
A whole lot of
And
fun.
hey, a part-time, I just cleaned the front. That was on another day. Then, when the cashier would take a day off, she had to have a day off. We got one day off a week. I would sell the tickets. I'd handle that because I could handle money. And then I had another job that was interesting. In those days, the Liberty would advertise by putting these little cards in windows, in barber shops, in drugstores. It would tell you what the next coming attractions were. And
That's interesting.
I'd pick up some kid in the neighborhood like Bert Mann or one of the Hales boys would come along with me. We'd carry the cards. We'd go into these stores, and we'd give the owner 2 passes.
And then they would advertise your movie.
We would put these little window cards in their storefront.
I guess the only other way of advertising them was the
It
newspaper.
was the newspaper. And in this way, I got to meet a lot of the merchants. Of course, stores like Peppers and Rosenbaum's wouldn't allow you to put it in. But the lesser merchants were too happy to get it.
Sure.
And then later on,
How long did one movie play for?
Well, if it was a real good movie, it would play for a week. But that was rare. Usually it would start Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And then Tuesday you would have a preview. It would be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
And it would just be one movie at a time?
No.
Okay. You have double features?
We had, most of the time we had double features. If you
it's not like it is today where you go to the theater and there's like 10 movies you can pick from.
No. Each movie house just had one showing. If it was one picture, you had a newsreel. You had a short subject. It was usually a cartoon, and or you had one of these 12-minute shorts, comedy shorts, and then the feature film. Okay. If you had a double feature, then all you had was the two pictures and in between a newsreel, but you always had a newsreel. Mm-hmm. And there were a few times when I would have to go into New York City on a Saturday morning or on a Tuesday morning to pick up a newsreel that was hot. When the Mora Castle burned off the coast, they had and they took movies of it, and we advertised.
What castle that?
The Mora Castle was a disaster. It's a big disaster off Asbury Park. And I had to go into New York City to bring that film back, and we advertised it, and I got back just 5 minutes before it was due to go on.
I bet they were sweating that out.
Were they? Well, I was sweating it out too, but I couldn't leave New York, and it's the first time I'd ever gone to New York City. So on the way in, I had no problem.
Was it the first time you'd ever been in New York City?
By myself, going in. And the commutation from Plainfield was a little bit different from South Plainfield. And coming home, I was afraid I was going to miss my connection, so I spotted somebody I knew from North Plainfield, and I followed that man.
So smart.
But I got back. Mm-hmm. But in the Liberty, I had other duties too. I would have to change the marquee when they would advertise.
Up the letters.
That's right. I had to go up in a big ladder, and. No, working in the Liberty was quite an experience. Mm-hmm. And then, not only that, but we had the privilege, it was courtesy, of going into the other movies and seeing all their pictures. So I was able to see every show in town many times before the weekend was up. Mm-hmm. I would go on my lunch hour, or Mike and I would go sometimes after work if their show got out later than ours. And I got very devoted to the motion pictures. I used to like to sit way up front when I'd watch a movie, and then other times when I was collecting tickets, I would watch for a certain part of the film, and I would note the audience reaction, and it was amazing. You'd have different audiences, altogether different people, and they would laugh at the same time, they would gasp at the same time, and it was just so that the direction of pictures was altogether different, and it was geared to the audience. Right. And then another job I had, they didn't have automatic curtains. So you'd have to go behind stage and open it and close it. I really had the opening part, but usually I got the closing part. But
you had to stay to the end?
I had well, almost every day. But see, working nights, that hampered me. For one thing, I had almost no personal social life, because you couldn't, one day a week is the only time I had to be. And then many times we'd go out after the show was out, but then it was too late, because most of the girls and most of the fellows would have to go to work, unless it was weekend. And then on Saturday night, again, we didn't get out till 11:30. And then transportation was a problem. Finally, Mike got a car, but before Mike got a car, we would walk. We'd have to walk many times from South Plainfield to Plainfield and hitchhike. And I can remember going home many times, walking right down Plainfield Avenue through that bad section. It was bad then, not like it is today. Today it's impossible. Then it was just bad. Are you still
Yeah, go ahead,
or
go
are
ahead.
you stargazing?
No, go ahead. Keep going.
How are we on film? If you're pointing up there. Hey.
Get some close-up of Daddy's face.
I have lots of close-ups of his face.
Well, anyway, Liberty was
Hey, are you the cameraman or are you the actor?
But it was going nowhere, and I knew it. And I started the job hunt. Mike Kafka started the job hunt.
Now, after how many years now? What long period of time is this?
I worked there 3.5
3.5
years.
years.
Oh, and I tried going to Drake's Business College, and I took several courses, but I couldn't, I was not a typist, and I was not adept at shorthand. And two of the other subjects that I took at were simple. But to go to school at 8 o'clock in the morning and work till 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, it just didn't work out. But then I did an awful lot of reading during the morning hours, because from 8 o'clock until 1 o'clock, I had nothing to do 4 or 5 days a week. And I couldn't play baseball, only that one night a week. I used to get calls on a Monday sometimes. Lou, are you available tomorrow night? We got a game somewhere. And I'd quickly get into a uniform if I had one.
So that was
my gloves.
your hobby, really?
Well, I couldn't do anything else. Every once in a while we'd play football in a league Sunday mornings, but I couldn't even play baseball then. But I made many friends: Charlie Lacosta, the barber, Alex the Greek, and George's friend, George Lukides, who ran the stationery store next door, the confectionery store. And he's the one that always wanted me to go out with Libby.
Oh, geez, that's
Libby.
not good.
Well, hey, that's on tape. You can see this. Look out. Well, do you want me to go on, or you want to ask? No, any more questions about the Liberty Theater?
Well, let's move on now. How you got your job in?
Hang on a second.
Well, Jimmy Lammers and I did a lot of, that's my good friend now. He and I would go together in the morning before I go to work to all the factories in New Brunswick, any factory around. I went as far as Newark trying to get another job, and then the mailman that came into the Liberty talked me into, he says, well, what about government work? So I started to think seriously about that, and I took an exam for a railway postal clerk, and I finished with a 92, but it was around 40 or 50th on the list.
Now we're at Mac Motors.
Yes, we were at the employment office, and we picked up a blank, application blank to fill out with Jimmy and I, and we sat off and went into the room. And there must have been around 10 or 15 other young men in there.
Now, where's Mac Motors?
Mac Motors in Plainfield.
Okay.
On Front Street. And they were rowdy. They were throwing papers at one another.
What year was it?
1937. No, I'm sorry, 1936. And the man comes in there, and he was mad. And he says, out, everybody out of here. So one of the fellows says, well, what about our application blanks? He says, throw them in the basket, I don't want it. But he says, you two, wait a minute, you two. He says, you stay.
Well, why did he single out you two?
Because we were quiet, we were minding our own business, and the other, they were, as I say, they were rowdy. And so he took our application blanks, and he says, thanks, and he says, you'll hear from us, there's a vacancy. So.
What kind of job were you applying for? Was it just
anything? Anything at all.
Just to get into the...
just to get out of the Liberty, and it was a career. When you started to work for Mac Motors, that was a lifetime job.
Right.
So around a week later, I get a call from Mac Motors. Come on down for an interview. And I couldn't figure out, hey, this is good. And I went for the interview.
Did your friend get a call too?
What's that?
Did your friend get a call too?
No, I got a call.
Just you?
But then he told me, the man that interviewed me, he said, I had dinner with Mrs. McCarthy and police chief in South Plainfield.
Oh, and from the...
And she said, she mentioned to me, she says, a young man that lives in my neighborhood just filled out an application blank to work in your place. And she gave him my name, and he hired me. And my first job at Mac Motors was running blueprints. I would have to get a blueprint from the main office and take them out to the men that were working in the shop. And quiet. And but then see, I was used to the Liberty Theater. Now, Liberty Theater, I always wore a suit. And I wore a suit in there with a tie. And the first week I was in there, finally one of the men came to me and said,
did they rib you? Did they tease you? Because you were overdressed?
Well, for a while they didn't. See, they didn't know how I stood, how I got the job, what my connection. So one of the folks says, look, Lou, he says, would you do us a favor? And I said, sure. Take the damn suit off because we think you're one of the bosses. And he says, when they come in here, we duck. So I laughed, and of course, then I But see, what going from the office out into the workshop was different. In the office, you had to look nice.
Now, how much were you making? What was your salary?
I got $16 a week, which was a $4 a week increase per
So
month.
how many hours did you work?
Only 40.
Only 4?
And my hours were good, 8 until 4:30 with a half hour for lunch. That was good. And but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Also, the second day on the job, Carolyn and I shared a car. And I parked right in front of the place. I got there early. So that's a no-no. One of the men came to me and he said, look, he said, Lou, he says, you took such and such as parking place. You see, you have a code. So I said, geez, I said, instead of giving the man an argument, I said, boy, I said, I'm sorry. So lunchtime, I went out and I moved that car. Well, these are the things that endeared you to the fellow employees, because, look, you got in step. Well, anyway, I got along very well at Mac Motors, and there were a few other incidents there. I was only there around a month when a vacancy came up. Instead of being a runner, I got a job pulling stock, which is a job Frank Perino had all his life in Mac Motors. This was in the parts department.
I see.
And there they used to time you. They gave you a certain amount of...
They actually timed you? Or?
Well, they timed it this way. They would give you a workload sheets with the stock on it, and you had to pull that and put it on your card, and then bring it up, and the inspector would inspect it to make sure you got the right parts. And you all had a quota. For example, 200 was the worst you could pull, 250 was good, 300 was a little above average.
So the more you pulled, the better it was, and that's
well, they said it. That's right. They could sort of judge whether you were working or not.
I see.
But now, see, you're working with a different type of people here. You're working with men that are breadwinners, that had families, and these are adults. I was probably I was the youngest man in the place at that time.
How old were you?
What would it make, about 20?
20. 70, yeah, just 19 or 20, depending on when my birthday fell. Well, anyway, one day, you'd always watch your watch, and you kind of knew what your quota was, and you didn't want to do less.
That's where it started, watching your watch.
And it started long before then. And one day, somehow, my watch was an hour ahead of time. And I looked at my watch and I said, geez, it's 2:30, and here I've only pulled something like 250 items, and I'm usually pulled. So I went like to Dickens. And I didn't know it. I pulled over 400 items. Now, we had one man in there. We used to call him the Moon Man. And it was very unfair. Moon Man. Oh. He was a World War I veteran, and he'd been gassed. And as such, he was very moody. And he was a workaholic. And he would pull 450 or so many items a day. And I beat him. And of course, somebody found out and told him, well, that poor man, he couldn't take it. For around a week. He just almost killed himself working. But there was an important lesson to learn there. Is, look, you have a quota, they expect you to do so much work, and that's it. There were many other little incidents there, but I enjoyed Mac Motors because, mainly because of the hours.
Well, this must have now certainly improved your social life.
Oh.
You had evenings off and a lot more free time.
Yes, but strangely, I devoted most of my time then to playing. I was a little bit too old, not too old, but I was out of it for baseball because I hadn't any practice, but I played a lot of softball. And I became very good at softball. In fact, I made the all-South Plainfield team one year.
Right.
And, but there were a few other things about Mac Motors. We'll stay on your social, on the social part of it. While I worked at the Liberty, I went to took dancing lessons.
From that lady in Plainfield?
Mrs. Burdick.
What kind of dance?
Ballroom dance.
Ballroom dancing. Partner with the one-on-one.
Come here, let's
I
think you should do a little demonstration for the tape.
This way.
Wait.
That's good. But yeah, so the tape how people dance in those days.
Well, that's how they dance. No, they danced. They held one another. And sometimes cheek to cheek was one of the numbers, and then once in a while you would turn around like that.
That's great.
But I never jitterbug.
Jitterbug? I don't know if it's going to be
No.
All right.
Well, and anyway, I took a few dancing lessons there.
So this must have really
Thank you.
improved the social life now.
Well, you'd think that it would.
I think so.
But at any rate, well, I'm getting way ahead of myself, because while I worked at the Liberty Theater, I went steady for 2 years. Almost 2 years.
Oh, yeah, what was her name?
Grace Parks. She's was a very good friend of Elizabeth's. And then through this dancing school, Monday nights, she would invite certain students back. And you'd pay a quarter or something like that. And she'd have a little dance. She owned a big
Like a little social.
Yes, a big old-fashioned house in Plainfield, just off Front Street, past where Vandenberg is.
Okay.
And I was always invited. I had an open invitation. She told me I could come anytime. And the same way she would invite certain nice girls.
Oh, so this was like a way of meeting people.
Exactly. And you'd have dances, then you'd have a break, and she would serve cookies and soda and so forth. And it was fun. Well, when I worked in the Liberty, somehow, it's in my, I can't quite figure it out, but I think Mondays I got off early, because Monday I took the short cleaning assignment, and I must have gotten off right after the box office opened at 7 o'clock, so I was able to go. So I would go not every Monday or every other Monday, and I did get to meet a lot of girls there.
That's good.
And then, not only that, but the people that worked in the Liberty would have parties sometimes, birthday parties and such, and we would get to meet people that way. And our cashiers were very,
Was
very
this while
friendly.
Prohibition was going on?
Prohibition just ended.
Ended, okay.
Was this?
Prohibition ended in 1933. Prohibition, when you weren't allowed to sell.
I know that.
1933 or 34, that ended.
Okay.
But I always had a hard time.
Did you ever drink during Prohibition?
A beer or two. And I had a hard time getting a glass of beer at the bar because people wouldn't believe my age.
Oh, yeah.
And besides, I wasn't, you had to be 21 or 18, 21.
Tell the story when you went to your first wedding and you were 21 and you had to drink.
That's when we
He's not
worked,
there yet. He's only 20.
well, I can interject this story. We worked in the Liberty Theater then, and there were Blowskis. Absolute Fire. They lived way down the end of Lane Avenue. And they invited Mike. They said, Mike, after the movie, come on over. They were having either a wedding, I don't think it was a wedding party, I think it was whatever, it was a party of some kind. They wanted us to come over. So that night, Mike, Paul Casca, and I went to the wedding. And as soon as we walked in, everybody, oh, you gotta have a drink, you gotta have a drink.
Okay.
Well, I don't think I had ever had straight whiskey before. If I had, it was only a sip. So they pour a glass for Mike. Mike puts it in his mouth, and he almost choked on it.
Oh, he never had it either.
Well, he didn't have it that strong. Then they gave Paul a little sip, and Paul almost turned purple with it. And I took the swig, and I put it right down, and so it was water.
Oh,
And I couldn't understand, but then they all laughed, and they all kidded me about it for a while. But that was just one incident. I can remember coming home one night with Mike, and we were all dressed up, and this must have been around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning after being out Saturday night, and there was a big fire in the neighborhood, and Carolyn always kidded me about this. We went to the fire, and Mike, Paul, and I were the only ones that were dressed up. Everybody else had their night clothes on, their pajamas, and so forth.
you were out partying.
We were out partying, but it was a clean party. But I did meet a lot of people at that time in the Liberty, and in fact, later on in life, a lot of people would remember me and they'd say, I know you from somewhere. And the first thing I had to say was Liberty Theater. And they would remember it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Well, anyway, at Macmillan's, my social life did improve. But it got into a lot of baseball and a lot of softball. But I wasn't able to play golf. But I was able to caddy. I could caddy on Saturdays and Sundays.
What did you make as a caddy then?
No, it's the same rate. But then I got smart, and I got a steady member.
You latched on to somebody.
I latched on to someone who would ask for me, and he would give me $1.50 an hour. So I made $3 on Saturday and $3 on Sunday.
Oh, wow. So that was good. If you were
$6
making
plus the 18.
16 or 18 a week.
Yeah, that was great. But see, that was only for the one summer. It didn't last long. Then in the meantime, they announced an examination for post office clerk in South Plainfield. And at that time, a job in the post office was a very good paying job. Tops was 40 hours a week, $40 a week, which paid. That's the equivalent of $40,000 a year today. And the competition was strong. We had a man there, Hugo Reichhardt, who took the exam, who was a straight A student in high school. He was a straight A student in college. We had men in there. One later on became the tax collector. One became the police chief. I think even he may have become one attorney took the exam. But everybody in town took the exam. And when the results were announced, I finished first. 98.6. And that was a high mark. And the exam at that time was not like it is today. It wasn't an ABC exam or one where they lead you by the nose. It was a good examination. It was based on IQ, based on a little bit of math, on reasoning, and on memory. So all qualifications that you needed for post office, to work in the post office. Well, anyway, there's one other incident I want to tell you about at Mac Motors.
Yeah, I want to ask you about one too, but the time when the men goaded you into asking for a raise.
That's it. That was funny. I'm on this new job after the run, only a month or two, around 2 months, and you know how men are. They love to embarrass management, and they love to gloat somebody. Well, I was an ideal.
So enthusiastic and just so eager to please.
That's right. And then I agreed with him. Here I'm doing the job. Here I'm able to pull my quota. I'm never late. I'm always on time. They kept telling me this. And you caught on fast as anybody ever caught on in here. But you're being cheated. You're only getting $16 a week. You should be making, we're getting 24 or whatever it was. You should have gotten a raise the moment you came over here. Now, why don't you go in there and ask Mr. McLeod, that was his name. You tell him you're entitled to a raise. Well, boy, they got me all worked up. I went over and knocked on his door and came in. And I said to him, Mr. McLeod, and I went over and I said, I've been on this job now a month or 2 months, whatever it was. I'm pulling my quota, but I'm only getting the same rate of pay that I got when I was a runner. And he just looks at me and he says, Guider, he says, you're not even dry behind the ears yet. Get out of here. Boy, was I humiliated. And, you know, of course, they all laughed when they saw me coming out of that office. Boy, they laughed. So I didn't say anything. I realized it was a joke, and I took it like a good sport. But when payday came around, and I opened my envelope, there was an extra $2 in it. You see, McLeod had done this to take me off the hook, and at the same time to let those other guys know that he appreciates good workers.
That's good. That's a cute
that was a cute story. Then when I passed the post office exam, and I went in with Mr. McLeod and I told him I was leaving, I was going to give him a week's notice, he didn't like it. No, he says, look, he says, I understand the security of a post office job, I understand what it means, but he says, I'm going to tell you right now, he says, we have some plans for you. Meaning they were going to consider me for one of the foreman jobs or an office job. But by that time, I didn't change my mind. I had no confidence in private industry.
Sure, because
well, after what happened to my, that's right, and what happened to my father when he lost his good job. So I went into the post office. Do you have any more questions to ask about my Mac Motors or my social life there?
No.
And of course, when I went into the post office, I couldn't caddy anymore.
Oh, because you had to work weekends.
I had to work Saturdays, and just to go in on Sundays.
But you didn't work full-time, right? You only worked part-time, right?
I was a substitute clerk, and I got quite a rooking there, because it's not fair of me to say this, but it's not fair also for the situation that I got. Tony Fittipaldi and Johnny Sadek never had to take an examination. And had they taken the examination, I doubt that they could have gotten better than 98.2 or 98.6, which was almost 100 was the highest. And I came in, and I was surprised at my hours. I got 65 cents an hour, and I would work from 7:45 in the morning until 8:45 in the morning. Then I would come back at 4 o'clock and work until 7. And in between,
you had to be on call.
I was on call and standby. And if they called me and I didn't come to work twice within a certain period of time, I don't know whether it was 6 months or a year, I would be dropped out completely. So if I wanted to go to Newark or go somewhere with Mike or play golf in the
Couldn't,
daytime.
no.
I'd have to call in the post office and say, I'm going to leave town, or I'm not going to be back until 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. Any work for me? And of course they would say no.
But
And
you only got paid for the hours you were actually there.
that's right. And no sick leave again, no vacation.
Well, you were part-time.
No, I was a regular. But see, I had civil service status, which meant I couldn't be fired without cause.
Okay.
But I didn't like the work in the post office. It was no good.
What were you doing, sorting mail?
Sorting mail in the back, but I was only there at peak times. In the morning, I'd have to come in that early because we had trains leaving with mail going out. I had to make a dispatch, and then I wasn't supposed to do this. The postmaster had me sweeping the place.
Oh, James.
No, that wasn't. No, that was a deal that he pulled somehow. And then I'd have to come in at 4 o'clock because that's when the mail was heavy, very heavy. And I'd have to sort the packages and sort the mail. I got very little window work. The only time I'd come in and work on the windows would be on Saturdays when either Johnny or Tony was off. But the work itself was very, very boring. Here, going from the Liberty where I was always meeting people and I was always on the outside, moving around. But here, everything was so routine and it got to be monotonous. But it was a good second-class post office, and I became acquainted with all the phases of post office work. Sorting mail, handling the windows, working the packages, canceling machines. You wouldn't understand it, but we had a hand canceling machine with a crank on it.
Wow.
And then later on it
machine?
became electric. And Johnny Sonic was terrific to work with. Oh, he was great.
Show the crank again.
Crank the one hand pushing the letters in, the other hand cranking a wheel that would push the letters out. And
now, what year is this getting to be now?
this is 1938. 37 is when I started, late December 37, but this was 38,
So what was
39.
happening now, politically?
Politically, Hitler was...
Now, you were 21. Did you get to vote for your first president?
and I voted illegally.
Tell that story.
Primaries came up then in May, I think. And I went to vote. Mr. Bays was chairman of the Democratic Party, and I think Mr. Manning was chairman of the Republican Party. And I went in with my Casco. Well, my Casco was 21. And I wasn't 21, but I was going to be 21 in September. So when I went up there and gave my driver's license, the woman says, well, you're not 21 yet. You can't vote.
Right.
And I says, but in the general election, I will be 21, so I've got a right to pick my candidate. So she says, I don't know. So they called the two of them together, the Democrat and the Republican, and they didn't know what to do. So finally one of them says, what difference does it make? Let him vote. He's going to vote in the general election. And there was no contest in the Republican or the Democratic side. So they said, okay, you can vote. But no, the law specifically states you cannot vote in the primary before you're of age.
So who did you vote for?
The first thing I voted for was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And when they asked me what party I preferred, and I said Democrat, of course the Republican was a little disappointed. But the Democrat knew my family. He knew my father, the founder.
Now, what year was this?
This is 1930, the second term Roosevelt ran. This was 36. This was while I still worked in the Liberty now.
Who ran against Roosevelt that year?
Nobody. The primary. Against Roosevelt in the general election, it was Harold Landon.
And are you still a registered Democrat?
I'm still a registered Democrat.
But who do you vote? What party do you normally vote for?
I refuse to answer on the grounds of self-incrimination. I haven't voted for a Democrat nationally in ages. Not since, I think, LBJ. And I think somebody was in the booth with me when I did that.
Well, Joan...
Maybe me.
When Joan does her tape, you can tell us all about it.
Well,
okay, now, back to 1937.
Well, when I'm in the post office, well, those were not good years.
Now, was the war was the war efforts... I know
no.
The United States wasn't in the war.
No, and we had...
But Europe was, right?
No, the war in Europe didn't start until 1939.
39, okay.
But in the meantime, Hitler and the Nazi Party had taken over Germany. And we got very little information over here. It was misinformation. We knew that the Jews were being persecuted, but it wasn't stated clearly. we got was that their businesses and some of their high positions were just taken away from them. Some of them. And we had no idea. In fact, they were put in the camps then, but we didn't know about that. Some of the Jewish people would tell us about it, but we found it hard to believe that in this day and age people could do that. And there was mass censorship, too, from mail coming out of Germany, so we knew very little of what was going on. And politically here, we were still in a depression. Things were beginning to pick up, but we felt that with the Atlantic Ocean between Europe and America, that we weren't in any danger. And we always felt that, hey, if anything broke out in Europe, nobody could beat the British.
Yeah.
Oh, the British Navy. And the French. The French were supposed to have an invincible army, plus the Maginot Line. And we underplayed Hitler. And the whole world, as a whole, almost believed in peace. So that when Hitler would gobble up these little countries, they'd say, let him have it. What can he do with it?
Yeah.
And it wasn't a good situation. Until later on, then, again, the general public was misinformed. This is something that we'll almost never forgive Franklin Roosevelt for, because he must have had the information of what was really going on. But conditions here were, labor was beginning to organize. Labor was, the unions were beginning to gain what was due them, because before unions came in, before unions had the Wagner Act, it was terrible. The corporations, big business, they would take undue advantage of the working man. The working man was exploited, and we were all for unions, and it was odd. Democrats were in control, and big control of both houses in Congress and the presidency, yet they ran the post office almost like a sweatshop. It was terrible, the conditions in the post office. When you used to get demerits, if you made a mistake, at the postmaster's discretion, he would give you a demerit. And if you did something good, he would give you a merit. But you never got merits, but you got demerits. And the only time I got demerits was for insubordination. When I would tell a postmaster off, and I would tell Tony off, because they used to take advantage of me. And
Tony Fittipaldi?
Well, Tony Fittipaldi, there are two different Tony Fittipaldi, one pre-war and one after the war. After the war, you couldn't find a finer man. And before the war, he was awful to work for. He would shirk, he would unload duties on you, he would take advantage of you, and he was arrogant. But after the war, I've got to say, you have to go far to find a finer man. After he married, and he served in the army, he just came back and was altogether different and became a good family man. No, I have nothing but good things to say about Tony after the war. Before the war, we used to, and I wasn't alone, even Johnny Sack felt the same way about it. And John Gary, as a postmaster then, he was horrible. He would go around, he would spit on the floor. Spit on the floor, so you'd have to clean it up. And they would go around, and for the sweepers, they would take a cigarette and put cigarette ashes way underneath somewhere, so you'd have to move furniture to get at it.
Today, I'm sure you can't even walk.
Well, it should be that way. But later on, I only slept for around a year when somebody got wind of it, that they had money there allocated for a janitor. And then quickly, I stopped sweeping the floors. But whenever a carrier got sick in the post office, I would have to carry mail during that interim from 8 o'clock until 4 o'clock. I could carry mail. There's one funny story. On St. Patrick's Day, we were bowling that night. And after the bowling was over, Bill Keating and I decided to go out and have a glass of Irish whiskey.
Okay, so Keating, he must have been...
Bill Keating. Yeah, he was a great guy. And we couldn't find it, but you can't walk into a bar and just say, if you go in there and they don't have a drink, they have something else. So we must have gone around 4 or 5 places before we found Irish whiskey. And I'm telling you, that was one time. I wasn't drunk, but boy, I had a big head.
You were drunk.
No, I wasn't drunk, and neither was Bill. And...
neither was Fred the other night.
I was due to go to work the next morning at 7:45. the regular time. So it's a quarter after 7. I'm just walking up to the phone in the corner and say, I can't come in, I'm sick. It's the postmaster, Lewis.
Oh,
You better come in the word. Bill Keating is sick. So I didn't dare say no.
No, absolutely.
So I had a big head. I wasn't throwing up or anything. I just had a big head. And I went into work that day. Besides, I made an extra 6 hours pay.
Oh, so
And boy, hey, that's an
a lot of money
inducement. That'll sober you up in a hurry. But that was one of the funny things. But we used to kid around a lot.
2 minutes.
Johnny Sidek, Goff, and I remember the day before I was inducted into the Army, or the last day I worked before I went in, they decided to, when I came in, when I was ready to come in at 7:45, they lined up in formation and took a broomstick and they started to march around the office, teasing me going in. And one of the fellows accidentally lifted the broom too high and he broke a big light right over the postmaster's desk. Then the postmaster would know we were horsing around. So he got in his car, that was Goff, the messenger, and he went to Plainfield and he got a new bulb. It wasn't quite the same, but he got it.
Close enough, right?
He put it up and he just got off the chair and was walking away when the postmaster walked in.
And everybody pretended like nothing happened.
No, but we had a lot of fun then, as individuals, but when it came to work, it was horrible. We've only got 1 minute left with the post office, and I haven't covered anything. But the job grew on me, and I really like postal work, particularly for an advancement. At that time, to transfer into another post office was almost impossible.
Well, and you wanted to stay local too, I'm sure.
I didn't. I wanted a job. I wanted to make more money. I was getting nowhere fast. And in between now, we've got to come to where I met with your mother. We've only got a minute to go here, I think, Joan signaled. So I better delve on the post office. But there are many interesting things that happened. But I did learn how to run a post office, how to handle mail. And I was one of those individuals that actually believed in that motto, neither rain nor sleet nor snow nor dark of night shall stop these.
The mail from getting through.
On their appointed route of duty or whatever. I believed in it.
Okay.
And I can tell you some many instances of how mail, how we pushed mail. And we believed in getting mail to people.
Fingerprinting.
About fingerprinting, yes. Because I think I mentioned, it's still on this film, there were many spies and many subversives in this country that were
For the Germans?
for the Germans. They were members of the Nazi Party. Almost 99% of the Germans were loyal in this country. But you had that one. Yeah, you had that 1% or 5% or whatever, and then you had zealots in every nationality. And you have to remember that what happened at that time, that the Germans, after being subdued and held back, all of a sudden, when Hitler came to power, he gave them jobs, he gave them food, he gave them prestige, he started to give them back their country, part of their country that was taken away from World War I. So that this country was smart in doing this, because, you know, I wavered. I was foregoing stopping Hitler, then I was letting them go. That's the way it would swing back and forth. And the media, again, wasn't too informative. And in fact, I say the media generally was isolationist.
Right, anti-war.
Yes. Now, with these headings, many of them couldn't write. They would sign with an X. They couldn't read. They couldn't understand different languages. And to go way back, one of the reasons why Tony Fittipaldi was hired originally in the post office was because he could speak Italian. And Johnny Sidek, because he could speak Polish. And you actually needed somebody there, bilingual. But the unfairness was that civil service, at that time when I got that job, was supposed to be the best that was available for the job. That is, by an examination. And see, what they usually did in a case like that, they would take the two people that were working in there and assign them to a bigger post office. And then absorb the people on the list there, but they didn't in my case, and I was a victim of that. Well, anyway, to
Let's
get
go back to the fingerprints, yeah.
to the fingerprinting. Now that was one of the jobs, but
And you said they were fingerprinting the aliens, right, the Germans?
anybody that wasn't anybody, Polish people,
But
Italian
it was
people,
mostly
Chinese.
targeted toward Germans.
Well, no. The idea was to have them register, and annually they had to report somewhere. I don't remember what the exact law was, and this continued long after the war. This was a method of keeping track of all foreigners in this country. That was just one program.
So were you drafted then, or did you enlist, or?
Well, we're getting a little bit ahead of myself. I wanted to explain you some of my social life.
Okay.
But see, since I had to work until 7 o'clock every night, but sometimes we would get stuck with a heavy workload, and I wouldn't get done till 7:30 or so. So it was very hard for me to call somebody up and say, hey, how about going to a movie on Wednesday night? I'll pick you up at 6. I couldn't say 6:30. I had to say 7 o'clock. And then the shows would start at 7 or 9. And usually, if you wanted to date a girl that was working, and you went to the 9 o'clock show, that meant you wouldn't be home until midnight.
Right,
And,
that was hard.
it was hard. And then on Saturday nights, it was altogether different. But on Saturday nights, we would go out as a group. But then I had a couple of dates that didn't mind. I was going out with a model there for a while. And I could call her up at 6:30 from the post office and say, hey, how about going to the Strand and seeing a movie? And she didn't care. Then I went out with an Irish girl that was the same way. But most girls, it was hard to do that. But anyway, my dating was a little bit restricted. And we're coming pretty close. We won't remember how I met your mother?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Were you enlisted in the army then?
No.
Okay.
This was this was pre-war. But anyway, there was the war feeling hung over our heads. We went to I can remember when Hitler overran France.
Now, this is going to be around the late 30s, right?
This is 1939.
39,
And
okay.
so I'll go into 41 when I met your mother. It was
Okay.
on a Monday night. I'd go to Mrs. Burdick's. And at Mrs. Burdick's, I think the dances used to start at 7:30, so I could just about make it. And I'd get there, and this was one night in January, and I got there. And she came over to me and she said, I'd like you to, tonight, she said, there are 2 girls here from Somerville. I'd like you to dance with them once in a while.
Don't you remember the exact date?
It's written down somewhere, January the 14th or 15th.
Okay.
But I know it was the second week or so in January, and I said, sure. See, I had a reputation of being clean from not only the Boy Scouts, but my actions. I never used bad language, I didn't drink, I had a little car, and I wasn't wild.
Right.
So she wanted me to be, she did this to other girls that came there for the first time.
To meet the nice girls, to match them up with the nice
That's right, to match them up that way. So I went over and introduced myself to your mother, and the first thing she said to me was, Geiger, what a nice German name. And we danced, and she was with Catherine Rich, and I danced with Catherine. And
How did Mommy get there to Plainfield? Did you ever ask her?
they took dancing lessons.
Okay.
And Catherine Rich had an old run-down car, and they took a chance, and they went there, and this was a cold
First,
January
okay.
night.
Gee.
Well, anyway, Mrs. Burdick, that was the lady that ran the school, didn't want you to monopolize one person all night, so you had a mix.
To socialize, okay.
But I kept coming back to your mother. And then I finally asked her, and I said, you going to come next week? And she says, oh yeah, we're going to come. So she came the next week, and the next week, this fellow, Anton Beanders, he was tall, he was the best dancer in the room. He was a good dancer and a good athlete. So we got to the side, and I said, you know, I said, Anton, I said, I want to double date with 2 girls from Somerville. And he says, me too. I said, I want the blonde. He says, good, I want the brunette. So we went out.
Mommy was blonde?
Well, she had light hair
Light
yours.
hair.
Dirty blonde.
Not real blonde, honey blonde.
Honey, not dirty blonde.
And our first date was at the flagship. I don't know if you remember it.
Did you like her right away? Did you think about
Yes.
her?
No, I did. And no, and she was very, very articulate, and she was very up on what was going on in Europe, and of course,
Sure, in the war.
through Nanny. Well, Nanny had relatives there, and Tanta, and then they were up on what was going on in there, and she was very intelligent, and of course that got me. And after our first date, I remember I sent her a postcard telling about Mary had a little lamb, and oh, she loved it. And then from then on, it just got to be, we'd go out on a Sunday, maybe once during the week. And then when I introduced her to my gang, Mike Kafka and Marie.
When did you first go to her house and meet her family?
The first night.
Oh, the very first night.
First night I went in there, and I can still remember that little room, Doris, little Doris.
They all came out?
Who answered the door?
Rita was in nursing home. What's that?
Who answered the door?
I think it was either Doris or Josephine. And
They all wanted to see Mary's date?
that's right. And we sat down, and then Poppy came out and shook hands with me. And later on, he told me, he says, the first time I saw you, I knew you were all right.
That's good.
He said it in that heavy voice of his.
Did you meet Nanny too?
I met Nanny too then, yes, and Nanny was the all-American hostess. You couldn't beat Nanny for being a host.
No,
You were welcome.
Right.
That was it. And then around a month or so later on, I was invited to a dinner, and then I took Mary home to meet my family. But in the meantime, she met all my friends. And my best friend at that time was Carl Forster. He's a doctor now somewhere. And I introduced him to his wife. Now that's another little story I'd like to bring in. We were Carl was taking a course in New York City nights, and he told me this one Monday night. He says they got a special course, and he says, I don't have a ride home, so he says, I'll call you from Mrs. Burdick's, and maybe you'll pick me up and take me home. He came home just a little bit earlier than he expected, and I got a phone call at Mrs. Burdick's, and I was dancing with this May Mazika. She was a very tall girl, a very attractive girl, and right in the middle of the dance, I get hold of the phone. So I had to excuse myself, and you know, sometimes that's embarrassing to meet a girl up. And I went to the phone, and Carl just came in. So I said, May, I've got to pick a friend up, and I'm supposed to take him home. But instead of taking him home, I'm going to bring him here, and he's going to be the best dancer, or he's going to be a boy you're going to really like. And boy, they hit it off. He was taller than, just around an inch, 2 inches taller than she was. He's an ex-football player, very smart, and they hit it off good. But he had one flaw. He was kicked in the eye playing football.
Yeah.
A kick between the eyes, and he didn't have bifocal vision. So every once in a while he would have to squint. Well, this has a bearing, because later on, I'm going to get just a little bit ahead of myself. When the draft came out, Carl and I went down to Courier News to look for the numbers, Courier News building. They would have the old numbers out, and Carl...
Do they have a lottery?
Yeah, that's how the draft was.
Oh.
The secretary of...
Did they go by your birth date? Is that how they
No, you registered.
Okay.
And you were given a number. And each draft board in each town or in each district had certain number of people, maybe 400 people or so. And you were assigned a draft number, any number, a national number. Then, on a certain night, President Roosevelt reached into the bowl and pulled out the first number.
Now, what year was this?
Was that on radio? Would you
This
do
was
that?
1940. It was on the radio.
Okay.
This was in September of 1940. And,
So that was good, because then when you were called, all the people from your town were called. You weren't just called
well,
alone.
not quite.
Okay.
Not quite. I'll explain now how the draft worked. Then the Secretary of War, then, Stimson, a Republican, reached in and would pull the subsequent number. He pulled the first one.
Yeah.
And now Carl pulled an early number. Carl had a number in the teens, like 11 or 12, which meant he was going to go early. He was going to go in November or December. I pulled a number like something like 142. And that number was going to be called in maybe July or August. You could almost tell. They should see what they were taking. Was you had a local draft board, then you had another board that would form a contingent that would be drafted. Now, Dunellen was our headquarters. It was Dunellen, Bound Brook, South Plainfield, and the little towns around there. Piscataway would come out of Dunellen. Like they would pick 8 people from, they have to fill their quota was 50 men. 8 from South Plainfield, 12 from Bound Brook, 9 from Dunellen, and so. Well, anyway, now Carl, with this eye problem, he figured he may want to get married.
I see.
But he figured, look, if I'm going to be drafted, why should I wait? And we're clubhouse lawyers. So some wise guy comes up to Carl, why don't you go to New York? Yes. They'll knock you out because of your eyes. You'll have a complete deferment, and you may be able to get married. So good idea. I was in on it. So he goes to New York. He comes back in uniform.
Oh.
No, you know why?
Uh-huh.
Because when they check your eyes in the Army, they check it this way. One hand over one eye, then hand over the other eye. And with individual eyes, he was perfect, because when you shoot a rifle, you don't shoot it with two eyes, you use one eye. So he came back in uniform. And boy, was he disconsolate and was made, it was like a war.
Funeral, yeah.
Well, anyway, Carl went into the Army.
Carl.
He was in Africa, he was in Italy, he was in D-Day, and he never got a scratch. He got colds and so forth.
Wow.
But coming home, after the war was over, VE Day, he's standing on the back of a truck at night, going through France. There's a low-hanging wire.
Oh, no.
And it caught him right in the neck. And it was a miracle that it didn't decapitate him. But that was it. But he came back. And then eventually Carl, when he was a college graduate, but he went on to medical school and became a doctor, and he and May got married. And then I lost track of him. I shouldn't have. To this day, I'm trying to locate him, but I can't, because I understand May passed away. But May and Mary became very, very good friends.
Was May from Somerville, too?
No, May was from South Plainfield. And see, I knew her from the post office. She was a very attractive girl, but very tall.
So tell us then about how you enlisted.
Well, I still want to tell you more about your mother.
Oh, okay.
You see, my best friends then, the couples, were Mike and Marie. And they had, Mickey then. I was Mickey's first babysitter. And what we would do is we would go over their house on Saturday nights or one night a week and play cards. Or we'd go out. We'd always end up back there. And they took an instant like to Mary, which is something they didn't do with all the other friends, girlfriends that I brought there. But they took an instant like to Mary, and Mary got along with them swell. And then, of course, I met all the Weckermans. That first time I met Eric, and I met the Schweitzers, and I met Tante. And that first night is a night that was real nice. I mean, I can still remember the boss man shaking hands with me.
The first date you met, everybody was there then? Tante and the Schweitzers? And...
No, they were there the first meal.
Oh, first meal.
The first date, it was only I think Uncle Joe was there then, but they always called him Junior then. And I can remember him with his blonde hair. But Rita was the only one that wasn't there. She was in training. But I was welcome the day I walked in there, and I think I was welcome to the day that both Nanny and Poppy passed away. Well, anyway, to get on with the
came Frosty.
Don't put that on the tape, because they may...
Let's go on.
No, we were talking about enlisting. Well, anyway, I knew I was going to go into the Army, but in the meantime, they started the Army Air Force School, where you would go to school, and you would learn how to fly, and you would be commissioned a second lieutenant in the Army. And I thought, gee, this is a good opportunity for me. I'm going to go in and maybe I can get a commission.
Sure.
But then Helen Harkness, that Scotty Harkness, my best friend, I was his best man. She was a nurse in a Brooklyn hospital where they gave the eye exams for enlisting into this program. So she spoke to the eye doctor there, and that was the biggest thing that was knocking people out. And he said, yes, he said to her, he said, why don't you send this young man down to me? I'll give you the time for him to come in here, and I'll examine his eyes, no charge, and I'll give him the same exam that I give all the recruits. Because he says it'll be a waste of time for him to go through all those forms, all the other exams. He can't pass his eye exam. So I thought it was a good deal, so I went in. And I took the eye exam. But he put some drops in my eyes, and then I had to sit on a bench somewhere, and I went in. I didn't pass the exam. I had astigmatism.
Oh.
But there were all sorts of exams. You pull sticks, and you got to line the sticks up. Oh, it was a very thorough exam. And he told me right out, he said, you're wasting your time. They'll never take you. Well, I left that hospital. I couldn't walk across the street.
Because of the eye drops?
The eye drops. I had to ask somebody alongside, hey, mister, would you help me across the street? And then when I came home, I was on vacation. I took a week's vacation. I couldn't see, so I called my eye doctor up and I told him what happened. And he says, look, he says, there's no sense in coming in here. Now, I don't know what drops the man put in. So I suggest you wait a day or two and see if it breaks down.
Right.
And eventually it did. But that was an experience. Well, then anyway, I got disgusted. And that was in February. So in in March, I went for my physical. And
You'd
then I
only
went,
known Mommy a month now. You met her in
yeah,
January?
yeah, better a month, but we were dating very steady, and we were very, very compatible. And I was compatible with their family, and she liked my family. Of course, when you have a school teacher in the family, in those days, that was prestige.
Oh.
And the moment I told a boss man that I worked in the post office, that was the same thing, because post office workers in those days were looked up to. You had to take a civil service exam, as I mentioned earlier. You couldn't be just a Johnny-come-lately off the street. You had to have a certain amount of intelligence to pass the exam, and then the job itself was something that, people envied. They respected. Well, anyway, I went for my physical in Dunellen, and I had my first incident with the Army. The doctor there, he was an arrogant son of a gun. He tells us, Mom, just take off your clothes, just leave your shoes on. It was frigid. It was the coldest St. Patrick's Day, I think, on record. So, I turned to the other fellows and I says, I'm not going to do this. I'm not in the Army yet. I said, the heck with him. What the hell with him? So he comes out and he says, what's the matter with you fellas? See, they followed me.
There's always one, right?
I says, it's cold in here. He says, it's cold in here, so what? I says, you're darn right it's cold. And I says, I'm not going to sit here in my shorts and wait for you to examine me. I says, I'm not in the Army yet. Go ahead, do something to me. So he says, look, fellas, he says, I've got to go through with this exam. I says, well, why can't we go in your office? I says, all right, so we all went in his office. But that was it. And then I passed the exam, the physical exam. So instead of waiting, I volunteered. I said, look, what's the sense in waiting? I'm going to go in again. Why wait until June or July or even August to get called? I'll go in now. So I was accepted. And I went in. You want me to continue with the Army? No questions asked about pre-Army yet, about your mother?
Yeah, I had a question before.
We want to know about how the romance was going.
It was going great. And there was no doubt about it that this was the real thing.
Now, how long had you known each other?
When did you become engaged?
Later on, in one of my furloughs then.
Well, when you enlisted in the Army, how long was that term for?
It was supposed to be for 1 year.
Okay.
1 year. That was the conscription act of, forget what it was, for 1 year only. And then that was it. You were supposed to get out in a year. And the purpose was good. It was to train you so that in case anything broke out, all you had to do was, you even had your uniform, you had to go in, and you didn't need your recruit training anymore. You were ready.
You were ready. Okay.
And it was a good program, conscription. Most all of us agreed with it. But at any rate, it was at that time, there were many quick romances. There were many quick marriages.
Sure.
People they'd get married a year ahead of time. They wouldn't wait for the enlistment. But anyway, we didn't even talk marriage. We didn't even talk marriage at that time. But I went in. Frank Weckerman was given a big party before me.
Oh, tell that story.
Then he comes home because of his ears. And see, the examination you got in Trenton was a lot different from the examination.
Much more thorough.
Oh, that's right, that you got from here.
So tell us about when you left home.
Well, I never expected the Army to be what it was. I went in, and through coincidence, Paul
Did you have a
Catholic,
party?
Well, when did you go in?
in April the 23rd, 1941, Paul Catholic was with me. And we went to Dunellen, and from Dunellen we boarded the train. I was designated the troop leader because I had volunteered.
So that was right before America got involved.
Oh, it was long before April. It wasn't until December 41.
The same year.
And
Who saw you off?
nobody.
From Dunellen?
Carolyn dropped us off. Of course, my mother was crying somewhere. My father went to work. It was one of the few days he had to go to work. And they didn't think we were going to have a war. We thought we'd never get into it because of the Atlantic Ocean. And then we thought Hitler was a big bluff, even though he had conquered France by that time, that everything would blow over, it would all be settled, and that the British would win the war.
And that'd be the end of it.
And that'd be the end of it. But anyway...
So she dropped you off in Dunellen.
It dropped us off in Dunellen. From Dunellen, we took one train to Princeton. Princeton, we took another train to Trenton. Trenton, the bus picked us up, and we got to Fort Dix. And then you were assigned alphabetically into the recruiting barracks. And there's a big, tough sergeant there. He's teaching us how to make beds, bunks. And
This was for basic training?
Yeah, well, no, this is just for the recruits, just coming in. You were there for assignment somewhere. It was a reception center. And this one fella I knew from the post office, and he said, Rude, he said, oh, don't worry about it, I'll fix your bed. And he makes my bunk, and he made it real nice. So the sergeant gets through with the lecture, and he said, whose bunk is that? Well, I said, mine. You're not in the CCCs now, you're in the Army, soldier. And he goes over, and he pulls my sheets out, throws them down on the floor, and he says, you do it my way. So I was embarrassed, of course. But anyway, that was my first
typical
encounter.
Army, yeah.
But the first week that you're there, they assign you clothes, and you do little details. You police the area. They take you out to do work, but mostly it's just drills. It's just getting you accustomed.
And how old were you?
Then I was 25.
25.
24, I was going. Yes, I was 24. I'm sorry. I was going to be 25 in September. Well, anyway, one day I get a phone call. I don't know where I was, but you get details. You get details for KP, on the train duty, or guard, not guard duty, some kind of recording duty. You had to be. They want to keep you busy.
Right.
Well, this one day I got picked for latrine duty, and this other fellow's with me. But see, I'd worked in the Liberty, and I knew how to clean.
Sure, from the you had a
And we
experience.
cleaned latrines there too. So I said to him, I said, hey, look, we're in the Army now, let's do a real good job. And we had that place shining. That was on a Friday. We had it shining. And the sergeant comes in and looks at that place, and he said, wow. He said, that place hasn't been this clean in years. So we feel pretty good. The next day, we're on latrine duty. Because they were having an inspection from the brass coming down, and boy, he wanted another job. I learned another lesson.
Right, the hard
Well,
way.
anyway, in between Tuesday or Wednesday, I get a call from where I was to report to headquarters. Now, I don't know what it's for. And it was a rainy day. And I traveled across fields. They told me where it was. It's around almost a mile away. And I get to the place, and I go in there, and I say, Private Geiger reporting as requested. So he looks at me, and he says, Private Raymond Geiger? And I said, no, who is Geiger? And he says, oh, we want a Raymond Geiger. They sent the wrong Geiger here. He says,
Oh, no.
in those days, telephone communications weren't all set up in barracks. I said, well, would you go back and would you tell Raymond Geiger to come here? And that Ray Geiger turned out to be the son of the Geiger Calendar Company.
Oh.
And later on, Tom Wyatt had his first accident with Raymond Geiger. Well, this Ray Geiger was nice. When I went up to his barracks and I told him who I was and we made a mistake, he said, look, he said, you're a Geiger, I'm a Geiger, just tell me who you are. And we compared notes, and we weren't related. And what else did he tell me? He told me a few of them. He told me he was a Notre Dame grad, and he says, yes, he was the Geiger calendar. And I said, I worked in the post office, and I remember seeing the calendars come in, the almanacs, too. And that was it. I don't remember if he was a big, tall man, and he was related to Rita's friend, that Irish woman's name. Well, I can't think of it now off my hand. But anyway, that was another incident. And then Wednesday of that week, Carolyn drove down to Fort Dix with your mother, with Mary, and Mrs. Kafka. And we had a nice time, and then she left, and that's when your mother and I started to talk marriage.
So how long after you knew her then?
3+ months. Maybe just 3 months. Well, anyway, that Sunday.
What made you so sure? Why was she different from all the other girls?
She was different.
Well, what was
She was as
different
good
about
looking
her?
as any of the girls. We were very compatible. She was smart. And it was just that certain chemistry that exists between people. And you know, and you knew you could be compatible. And her family. Her family and for one thing, the cooking was almost the same. And although my mother was Hungarian, my father was German. And when they met my father, one of the first things they said was, oh, he speaks German. They liked the way he spoke. And then again, Poppy Weckerman was so interested in painting, furniture refinishing.
Right.
And when he saw Poppy Geiger's little shop,
he was interested
and Poppy Geiger was a gilder. A gilder is I think I mentioned it before, the most sophisticated form of furniture refinishing. But anyway, generally we fit it in. I was able to kid with Eric, and I was able to get along with Frank, and I knew baseball, and we just fit, that's all, that was it. And this was something that was going on in those days.
But you had no idea when you would get married then, because you
No.
didn't know about your military.
No, we didn't. Well, anyway, she came down that Sunday, and boy, was I sweating out getting on KP. Because she got on KP.
That was it.
That was it. Well, I didn't do her KP. She came on that Sunday, and then that was it. The following Tuesday, I was shipped out to Fort Bragg.
Did you ask her to marry you that day?
Yes. Then it was definite that we were going to get married, but we didn't know when.
What did she say?
She said no. What do you think she said?
Honey,
She said yes, emphatically. All right.
wait, say that again. She said yes. And how did she say
Aunt
yes?
Carolyn was with my mother and with Mrs. Kafka while we went for a walk around a little park or something. And
So you asked her to marry you while you were walking around a little park at Fort Dix?
Fort Dix, yeah.
Remember the name of the park?
This was not necessarily unusual. This was something that was happening all along.
Do you remember the date?
The date must have been, well, it was April the 23rd. It was on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Probably April the 28th.
Then from there you got shipped out. Where was Fort Bragg?
2 minutes.
Fort Bragg was in North Carolina, Fayetteville, and we were placed into a horse-drawn artillery outfit, which was vintage, 1912, 1913, horse-drawn.
And you took care of the horses, right?
Well, I was assigned to Battery A. They picked you according to alphabet, or they mixed you up somehow. Anyway, I was in Battery A. Paulie Kafka was in Battery C. Doug Manning, another South Plainfield, was in the medics. I don't know how he got into the medics, but the medics picked him. Well, anyway, we were supposed to get our basic training that way.
Okay.
And our basic training was futile. Oh, I hated it. Everything was by the numbers. You salute by the numbers. Number one, number two, number three, number four. If you were doing drill, you did it by the numbers. Your right foot number one, your left foot number two.
Can you show us?
Well, that's regiment.
Give us a salute. Give us a salute for the camera. Wait. All right. Give us one other salute there for
There
the
you go.
camera.
And that's a good one, because I can see it in the mirror.
Did you count it?
No, well, we had to learn. But I couldn't take to that, and there were a few other fellows in there. But my Boy Scout training,
Helped.
with drill, foot drill, I could follow every command that they gave, and when it came to setting up little pup tents or working out in the field, I was right there. And I was very responsive because in the Boy Scouts, I learned obedience, and I learned how to take orders. And no, I was good as a recruit. But I want to run this minute off and go into the other part of it on the next tape, because that is very, very important. But anyway, my first 2 weeks at Fort Bragg were awful. They had no weapons. We had actually sticks. And then we had one pistol, where you had to break down a pistol, part to part to part, and put it together again. They had one pistol for around 50 men, spread out in a blanket in the middle of a compound on sand.
That was the American Army.
I looked at it and I walked away. I didn't even watch it. Oh, what's the sense? I couldn't learn anything. And when it came to anything else, with the horses, it was a little bit different. See, this was a National Guard outfit from Trenton, New Jersey, with their headquarters, and they wanted recruits from New Jersey, New York, and parts of Pennsylvania, so we'd be compatible. We'd be in the same area. That was smart, and the Army acceded to this. They allowed this to happen, and it was good, because we met people from Somerville, we met people from Westfield. It was all in our own neighborhood. But it was the horses. How are we coming to time?
2 seconds.
2 seconds.
The old
Well,
folks are going to go together.
that in the post office,
Uh-huh.
and when Tony was fingerprinted, see, I despised the Army. For one thing, I'd always had a room of my own. I had my own private bath, and in the post office, I was working by myself. Now, when I got into the Army, I had to share my bedroom with 40 people. We had to go into open showers and open bathrooms.
That's a big adjustment.
Hey, that to me was a big, big adjustment. And then, as I say, I couldn't stand the regimentation. And then the Army food wasn't bad, but it didn't agree with me. And I lost weight. I lost about 10 pounds the first.
Tell the story when you wouldn't eat the food or something.
That'll come. But anyway, I liked the horses. And I wasn't afraid of the horses. They had one wild horse there they called him Hitler, and he was really wild. And a lot of the men were afraid to You had a saddle. And they asked me to do it, and I did it. But I wasn't afraid of Hitler. But I didn't have the horses very long, because one day I get a call, report the regimental headquarters. So I go up there and tell him who I am. And the Sergeant Bakey calls me over there, and he shows me a room just a little bit smaller than this room, and it's loaded with mail. He says, "You're a postal clerk?"
Oh, I like the story.
He says, "Do you think you can do something with that mail over there?" And I said, "Sure. What do you got?" And he takes me up to a mail case, and he says, "Let me see you sort the mail."
All right, you're on.
So I look at the mail case, and see, I'm just go like this. He says, "Go ahead, sort the mail." I said, "I got to study it first." So I studied the mail. It was a simple case. I grabbed the mail there, and I grabbed the bundle, untied it in a hurry, broke the string, and I just started to flip right through the mail. And he looks at me like this. And he says, "Hey," he says, "You think you could work this mail?" And I said, "Sure, I could work it." And he says, "What about those sacks over there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We're going to build a mail room for you." He said, "You want the job?" And I said, "Boy, I can hardly wait." So then he says, "Okay, go back to Battery A," and then I got orders to move me to headquarters Battery.
Did they read a list, Dad, with names, showing what you had done, and how did you know you worked for the postal?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because, no, I think that's a good question. You were classified when you went into the Army as to your previous occupation. And when they found postal clerk, fortunately, Geiger came before somebody with a... that's right, with a couple of other names, and there were 2 or 3 other postal clerks in there. But and carriers, but they wouldn't have been able to do what I did.
And why did they need postal clerks? Tell that part.
Because the Army, that's a very good question. No, that's an excellent question. The Army was composed of mainly West Pointers and regular Army people and politicians that ran the Army. But they had no idea of the importance of mail. Mail was the chief means of communication. When you had regular Army men in, the regular Army men didn't have families. They didn't have close ties. And they could go along without getting 1 letter a month. That was enough. But when the GI went in, he had wives, he had sweethearts, he had mothers and fathers and friends and prospects, people that were going to go into the Army that were interested. And writing was the main source of communication. You couldn't, for one thing, you couldn't afford to get to a phone. And there was no other. And they didn't realize the importance of mail. So all of a sudden, this outfit comes down there to North Carolina, and they are besieged with mail. And this regular Army sergeant, who was in charge of it, was not a post office man. He didn't know how to handle it. So then they decided that if they didn't have somebody in the outfit that could handle mail or knew the mail regulations, they would have to request one from the military. But I was right there. So
no more horses?
No more horses. So the next day, after I get settled in my new barracks, I come up there. The sergeant tells me, he says, "We're going to build a mail room." And he says, "This is my ideas. You got anything to add to it?" So I said, "Very little." And he says, "There's a carpenter coming up here." And the carpenter came up, Wilbur Brower.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
So that was nice. So we set it up, and I didn't have to make many suggestions because the sergeant knew it. But the one thing that they couldn't get over was, and this is something that has helped me through the whole Army career, was the way I could tie a bundle of mail on. You get string, you tie it this way, and you just snap it.
I bet it's from the old Boy Scout days.
No, that was what I learned in the post office. See, but tying knots helped later on, and tying the mail sacks. But anyway, that sergeant couldn't get over the way I would break open, I would tie mail up and throw it accurately where it was supposed to go, and the way I would sort mail. And no, I had a lifetime job. In fact, the job got so good that the sergeant that was in charge of it, he never even hardly ever came into the mail room.
Wow, that was really good.
It was good. I was on my own, and I had good hours. I had a private bathroom up in headquarters.
Oh, so things started improving.
Oh, they improved magnificently. Then, for lunch, I didn't take lunch with the regular Army because I had to be there to give mail out. So I would go in a half hour earlier, early chow.
Early to eat, right at your alley.
And that was good because the cooks would want their mail.
Oh, so they were going to give you the best little...
I could take the mail over there. You didn't have to go to mail call. They would be very, very friendly with me. And no, I liked the mail. And then I made certain changes. For example, if anybody wanted mail on Sunday, a fellow would get a package from home,
Sure.
and he would round me out. On Sunday, I was doing nothing. I would go up and open the mail room up. And then I made a habit, which I carried on even when I became an officer. I would open the post office up for 1 or 2 hours on a Sunday, so people could come in there. And if they wanted to buy stamps, I wasn't supposed to do this, but I would always keep maybe $2 or $3 worth of stamps on hand, so that they would have it. And then I also became the mail messenger. From the mail room to headquarters, they had to have somebody run a message center, deliver, go up there, bring back orders, and take messages there, and that was my duty. See, I would have a chauffeur, or I would drive a mail truck, or a private car. So I got to do a lot of errands on the post that I wasn't supposed to, such as dry cleaning, picking up pictures.
Oh, wow, very diversified. But it gave you something
I wasn't supposed to do it, but see, I did it. And,
Tell me about the supplies visitor.
well, that was, no, that was, I'm going ahead of myself, but it's worth telling. We went on maneuvers, and when you're on maneuvers, there's 600,000 troops on maneuvers, 300,000 on the Red Army, and 300,000 on the Blue
That's a lot
Army,
of troops.
scattered all over North Carolina. Well, Elizabeth and Ed got married on Thanksgiving Day, right around Thanksgiving Day, and they were going to Florida on their honeymoon. And this one night, it must have been around 8:30 or so, and it's dark. This is in November, almost December. They're passing through North Carolina, and they see a contingency of soldiers there. So Ed says, gee, I wonder if Louis near here. So they stop and they ask the soldier, they say, do you know where the 112th Field Artillery is and what soldier he's marked? He said, it's familiar, he says. They're around here somewhere. So he yells over to somebody, where's the 112th? And the fellow says, oh, he says, they're down that road over that dirt road. So they ride down that dirt road around a mile or so, and they stop and they ask the soldier, where's the 112th Field Artillery? Do you know? And he says, it's the next outfit.
I mean,
So,
what luck? I mean, you
this
know.
is only around 300,000 troops in this one side. And they stop and they ask the next soldier, and they say, is this the 112th Field Artillery? They say, yeah. Where's headquarters and headquarters battery? He says, you're in it. Do you know a fellow Lou Geiger? He says, that's his tent. And I was around, I'd say 100 feet off the side road. So he went in to tell me, he says, hey, Lou, and I'm in bed.
Of course, early to sleep.
Almost everybody was,
Yeah,
because you had nothing to do when you're out in the field. And it gets cold at night there. So he says, you've got a couple of visitors here. He says, a guy called Ed Gorb and your sister. Oh, my God, I said. So I quickly got into my clothes, and we went out to a place in a famous resort, Southern Pines.
Oh, yeah, Pines, the golf resort.
Yeah, we went right near there, and they had a meal, and I had a sandwich and a beer or something like that.
Nice.
But that was really a coincidence. How they right to my tent. And see, my tent was apart from the whole regiment because it was a male tent. And I had another fellow, Al Foyer, sleeping with me. He was a Jewish fellow, and he was very religious and very smart, and he was the same type I was. He didn't fool around, he didn't go out, he was a good chess player, and we hit it off well. So he asked me once, he says, you got room in your tent. He said, why can't I even bunk with you? I said, I'll be glad to have the company. So he moved in with me, and he was also a company clerk.
So while you were in the Army then, it's interesting to tell now what Mommy was doing, what her job was.
First she was, that's a very good question also. First she was working for an attorney, Marvin Weiss. He was known as the Weasel. He was, in fact, when you refer to him, many people will remember him as being called the Weasel. He was disbarred for a while. He got disbarred right after I went into the Army.
Okay.
So then your mother went to Calco.
Okay.
And she got a job in Calco in the typing pool. And she was good. During her lunch hour, she would take a blank piece of paper, carbon, and another piece of paper, and type in my letters.
So nobody could read what she was
Nobody, and they wouldn't know. And she was so fast. She was a good typist. So she worked in there for around a year, I'd say.
Okay.
Maybe so. When they opened up the Belmead supply depot, and they were looking for help. And you remember a good friend of Josephine, Miller was her name, Mary Miller, Margie Miller.
Oh, yeah, I know who, Kathy Miller.
Kathy Miller. Her father was the head of the employment agency that was hiring people.
Oh, what a break. Uh-huh.
So he sent Mommy down, and he told him, not in the typing pool, she is a good secretary. And they were looking for a secretary for the colonel. And she got the interview, and she got the job. Well, that, if you know what a colonel's secretary is on an army post, everybody looked up to it. And then Madeline Priscilla was the other one. He had to have two. So, and your mother loved it. And she fell in with the colonel because they loved to mimic the officers that came in there with the funny characteristics that they had. And the colonel had a big dog. And the colonel had a
big dog.
Well, anyway, but your mother loved it because the colonel took to Mary because she was his type. She was good for a laugh, and she was an excellent secretary. Made few mistakes, and she had that sense. She knew when to omit things. She knew just how to handle. She had a lot of discretion. She was great for the job. Later on, he told me this. He said she was indispensable. Well, anyway, she got that job. And hey, Joni, please.
No, come on, it's Daddy's tape.
You'll notice later on. Anyway, on my first furlough, I was only in the Army around 2 months. We were down in North Carolina, and they felt that they started to give 3-day passes along with weekend, 2-day passes along with weekend passes. And this Sergeant Bakey, that was my superior, he applied immediately. But the people, the sergeants that wanted to select it, they didn't like Bakey. Because Bakey was somebody who would take advantage of people like me. But I didn't care. They knew he was taking. But I loved it. So they gave me one of the first furloughs instead of him. You know, he was very annoyed about it because it also meant that for 5 days he had to take care of the mail. And he had to do it the way I did it because I said
your system, sure.
And anyway, I came home on furlough, and boy, that was something.
When was this now?
This was in June of 41. My hair was cut short. I had lost weight, but I had the field artillery boots. I had boots with spurs. And I had a big campaign hat.
I remember seeing pictures of you.
Now, campaign hats were rare in those days. Only field artillery, I think, was allowed, and certain forms of military were allowed to wear it, so that was rare. So I came back, and of course, I was there 5 days, and I spent 4.5 with your mother.
Sure.
And I did a little bit of visiting, just catching up. I went back to the post office, and say hello, and spread the word around. I visited some of my friends, but most of the time I spent with your mother. That was the first furlough that I had. And then, in the meantime, see, we had horses, although I couldn't deal with horses. Then finally the Army smartened up and they took the horses away from us and we became motorized and they changed our weapons. But in the meantime...
This is still pre-war.
This is still 1941. In August or September, we went out on maneuvers, on this big Carolina maneuver.
Right.
And I didn't participate in the actual setting up of it, but I was mayor. Because when you're out in the field, things were even worse. And then I was given strict orders again, not to, because I had to run into the civilian post office at Fort Bragg to pick the mail up. This is once a day. I would go in the morning and I'd come back late in the afternoon. And they would pack a lunch for me. But again, I wasn't supposed to do errands, but I was very, very discreet about that, and I did them.
Sure.
Well, you have to understand.
Sure.
It does pay off. You do favors for people, and why not? If I got caught, what would I get? I'd get a reprimand, but I did a good job. As a mail clerk, a regimental mail clerk, I was good. And I can remember once, when I wrote home to him, well, I just said something about, oh, we had a lousy meal. I never should have said that.
Oh, she was all worried.
For Thanksgiving Day, she mailed me a full chicken.
How'd she do it? How'd you get there in time?
She got it, and she got it timed perfectly. But the worst part of it was, for Thanksgiving Day, we all had turkey.
Oh, it was probably the best meal you had. So which one did you eat?
Both.
You solved the problem, right?
I managed, but I never wanted to tell my mother that.
No,
but working out in the field was, it was a problem. See, I had access to showers in camp. I had a very good driver. His name was Boo McNutt. No, Boo something. Anyway, he was a good driver. He was a good conniver. He would go up to these sergeants, and maybe once a week he'd tell them, he'd say to them, he said, hey, how about letting us take a shower? And they weren't supposed to, but they did. They would let us take a shower.
So you spent your whole time in Fort Bragg, or
No, I'm coming to that. And then there were a few more things that happened. Oh, maneuvers. This was funny one. See, the men in the field at first had no chance to take a shower. So one afternoon, one evening, around 5:30, right after chow, it started to pour rain. So the men said, oh, they all ran out, got soaked, stripped, lathered themselves up. But it was one of these 5-minute showers.
Oh, no.
Well, see, I was lucky. I didn't get caught in that because I could take the
shower anytime you wanted.
The showers. But then we got rid of the horses, and we came back to, now we were known as the dissidents then. There were 3 of us, Jack Walsh, Mike O'Donnell, and me. We hated the war, we hated Roosevelt, and we didn't care who knew it. Because, see, at that time, Roosevelt was pushing us on into war. And we had one fellow who told us his brother was in the Navy. And he wrote to his brother and he said, it is shameful what we're doing to these German subs and ships. He says, we're shooting at them and they're not allowed to shoot back. We're not sinking them. But he says, see, we were delivering arms and supplies to the British. Now, in a time of war, that isn't right. They have a right to sink our ships. And we were always afraid that the Germans were going to lose their cool and sink one of our ships and get us into war. And here it was, we were in for a year only. I was going to get out in April. And then they decided in late November that they didn't need men over 32 years old. So we're just discharging all these men that were over 32 years old. Because they felt...
Well, did they feel then that the threat of attack was from the German side, not Japanese?
Yeah.
So everybody discounted the Japanese.
Well, that's right. But then, I used to do a lot of duty. See, what they call duty is you have to have an enlisted man on with an officer at all times. Then they would close the place down at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and the officer's phone number would be handy in case of an emergency. But on Saturdays and Sundays, they'd need somebody in headquarters because there was always an emergency leave. Somebody would pop in and want to know where this was located, or they just want some information, and they'd need an enlisted man there and an officer. The enlisted man was the gopher, and I would answer the phone most of the time. So on December the 7th, I'm on duty. And around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, some kid comes in from Brooklyn. I remember his name was a good baseball player. Hey, Lou, he said, where's Pearl Harbor? I started thinking, I said, no way. And he says, the Japs just attacked us there. He says, they blew up the whole harbor. And I said, go on. I said, that's just another, I said, that's just another radio stunt like that Orson Welles thing. I said, they're just trying to, Roosevelt's trying to get us into war. So the major was standing there, and he looks at me and he says, oh, I don't believe it. He says, I would have gotten something. He goes into his office and the phone rings, and he comes out and his face is white. And he says, Geiger, he says, that's true. He says, so we've got to take action immediately. Have they closed up everything?
They didn't know who would get attacked. I know.
No, well, they knew the story then.
Yeah, but they didn't know if anybody else would get attacked.
That's right. So here we are in the middle of North Carolina, and we go in. All the lights are out there.
Did Roosevelt immediately declare war on Japan?
Well, Congress declared war.
Right.
But he issued the declaration, and they passed it. But anyway, that night, it was somber. So I remember Jack, Mike and I went for a walk, and boy, we were gloomy then because we knew that,
never get out.
Oh, before that, I got to go way back. I got to go back around 4 or 5 months. Roosevelt wanted to keep us in for 1 year plus the duration of the war. And oh, how we hated it. And this is what has undermined my confidence in government to this day. Because we had an obligation. We signed up for 1 year, and we felt that, look, we signed up for 1 year. Unless there was war, we should be let out at the end of our year. Every recruit that comes in after this time could take that. So, well, there was quite a hassle over this in Congress.
Yeah, but the war did start one.
No. This was before then. This was in September of 41. December is when that started. And then this is when they wanted to extend my service. I wanted to get out in April and get married and go about my life. And so did everybody else that was in. And we were ready to rebel. We used to write Ohio on the bulletin board, OHIO, which meant over the hill in October. We were going to have a general strike. I mean, we felt bad. Congress felt bad about it. The newspapers. Oh, it was Lindbergh. Oh, Lindbergh was terribly opposed. But anyway, it passed Congress by one vote. And President Roosevelt signed it. But the officers played it smart. When you wrote Ohio on a blackboard, they would write on it, me too.
Yeah, they agreed.
They agreed. And when you would gripe and moan about it to them.
You were all in it together.
They were all in it together. But when Ohio came, nothing happened.
Nothing, yeah.
Well, anyway, that night was a gloomy night, and the next day was the Holy Day of Obligation.
Of December the 8th, yeah.
And I remember we went to church, and boy, we were gloomy. We come out of church, and the jerks, officers and the Army, had us digging trenches. Now, how were the Germans going to bomb us in the middle of North Carolina? No lights on.
I know. Well, I guess they didn't.
No.
They never thought they'd bomb Pearl Harbor, I guess.
No, but here, we should have been doing something else. Well, anyway, we were restricted to the post. I get a telegram from the Harknesses. They felt sorry. They had 4 boys, and none of them were in service. I was in service, and we were going to go to war. So they sent me something like $10. Western Union money order. But you couldn't cash that on post. You had to go to town to cash it. And I was restricted. I couldn't go to town. And they only would hold money 3 days or so, and they would send it back. So they returned the money to the Harknesses. And they thought I sent it back.
You were insulted?
Because, that's right, because their boys weren't in and I was in. And I didn't know about this. I didn't even know where the money was from. I didn't even know it was money.
I see.
I had no way of knowing.
Sure.
And then I found out on the net, I don't know how, somehow through a letter, and I wrote them and I explained to them, and I think that I got it across.
So where were you stationed then after the war broke out?
In Fort Bragg, up until, that was in 1941, and that went into 1942. Then in 1942, we were going to become school troops. The artillery school there for officers was at Fort Sill, and they were going to they needed troops to practice with. And we were school troops. Okay. So we were sent out to Fort Sill.
Where was that?
In Oklahoma, right in the middle of, outside of, Oklahoma City, right near Oklahoma City, on the Panhandle, very near where Callan was. Well, anyway, we had to get shots. Tetanus shots and all sorts of other shots. And since I was the male, I always went early.
Oh, right,
so
okay.
The place where they were giving the shots was right next to the mess hall. So I walk into one door, and the man says to me, "Come here," gives me a shot. Then I'm walking out the other door to go to the mess hall. Another fellow says, "Where are you going?" And I says, "Going to mess." He says, "Oh, no, you're not getting away with this. Come here." And he gives me another shot. Well, I got a double shot. But I didn't know.
Of course, you didn't know.
I thought it was another
injection of some sort.
Injection of some sort. So that afternoon, I began to feel sick. I got hot, and I started to break out. And luckily, around 4 o'clock, the doctor comes in. The captain, the doctor, and he looked at me, and he says, "You all right?" And I said, "No, whatever you mean." And I said, "I don't feel good at all." He says, "Look at you." He puts his hand in him. He says, "I think you better go on a sick call." So I went on a sick call. And they looked at me there, and they rushed me right over to emergency on the post. And they examined me there, and they had a specialist come in. The specialist on the post, he says, "You been near any animals?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm in a horse house."
Sure.
And he said, "You been in?" I said, "Wait a minute. This was in the middle of the Monday." And I said, "Yes, come to think of it." And I said, "When we went for a walk, we walked through the stables, and I must have patted one of the horses." So they put me in isolation. They put me in a little room like this, fed me with a stick that night. They opened the little door and pushed my meal in.
Oh, that is terrible. We probably were so sick anyway.
And we were going to leave to go to Fort Bragg, to go to Fort Sill in 2 days.
Oh, boy.
And I wanted to go with him. I didn't want
Sure.
to stay back and go to another. And I had
Sure, well, your
what I
buddies.
thought was a soft job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next day they sent for a specialist, a civilian specialist, and he comes in, and he was very cautious, and he examined me, and he said, "Were you near the horses?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Now I want you to tell me exactly what you ate the day before and what you did."
Mm-hmm.
So I told him, I said, "I ate a normal meal, then I went for my tetanus shot." He said, "Wait a minute." He says, "You went for tetanus?" And I says, "And something else, some other shot." And he says, "Another shot?" He says, wait a minute. He calls them up there, called the headquarters, and said, "What shots did you give out?" And they said, "We only gave out tetanus shots." And he told me to repeat it. I got a tetanus shot. And then it began to wear off. So then he said to me, he said, "Go back to your outfit." So I packed up.
Great. Mm-hmm.
But then I had the most interesting assignment on the way over from Fort Bragg to Fort Sill. I was a route marker.
Uh-huh.
Now you see,
Mm-hmm.
okay, as a route marker, you would go ahead of the troops. You would fit into a what they call a weapons carrier, around 6 to 8 men, and they would drop you off at an intersection, and you would direct traffic so that your trucks would know where to turn. And see, your trucks would take around 5 minutes to pass, and this was usually in the middle of a town.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was going to set up something where the post office could drop mail off en route, and I would pick it up and deliver, but the post office said no. So I became a route marker. Now, as a route marker, I had to dress with a helmet then, with a weapon, and with a valve pack, because you're trying to impress the civilians. And the civilians see you. They don't see the men on trucks. But that was fun. You'd get off in the middle of a road, stranger, and the people would admire you. I can remember just before we crossed the Mississippi, I forget the name of the town, policeman comes over to me, and it was right around noontime. So he says, "Look, soldier," he says, "a whistle is going to blow," and he says, "all the girls are going to come out to go to lunch." And he says, "You stop traffic always."
Oh, that's cute.
That is cute. So I did what he said. I stopped traffic always, and around 4 or 5 girls would cross over, and each one would give me a kiss.
Oh, that's cute.
That was cute. And the adventures that we had there, I better not go into them because I'll be on it for almost forever. Because someday I'll tell you, as a route marker, we got in an automobile accident, but I wasn't hurt. I just got bruised, and I had some more fun. Got to snow. I'll tell you many other things that happened on it. But I got to know the town: Savannah, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, a big town in Louisiana, another one in Texas, and then of course Fort Sill. And then when we got to Fort Sill, the routine was the same. But Fort Sill, the climate was altogether different. And again, I was a regimental male orderly. And I was only in Fort Sill around 1 month, less than a month, when they were going to allow 1 man or 2 men from each outfit to go home, and they drew names. I won.
Boy, what a lottery to win.
But a lottery win, that was the biggest lottery win
For how long?
I think it was 10 days.
Oh, that was a nice one.
No, I think it was only 10 days, but you traveled. It took you 2.5 days to travel.
Wow. So you hadn't even been in the Army a year yet then?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you had been
I've been a little over a year. Pearl Harbor.
Oh, okay.
April would have been my 1 year, and this was in the end of May.
Okay, so it was a little over a year.
It was a little over a year, and of course your mother and I had a great time. And I saw people, and on the way back I met a priest who became a very good friend, and he visited us in West 6th Street. You may or may not remember him. And he was stationed at Camp Kilmer later on. He joined the military. But Fort Sill was altogether different from the other posts. It was very, very windy, and we slept in first in tents, then hutments, and never in barracks. And it was at Fort Sill that I got my commission, which I'll go into on the next page. But I'm going to have to cut this thing. I want to. I'll go through the military part of being an officer very rapidly.
Okay, well, how did you get to Puerto Rico then, from Fort Sill?
Well, that was I had to become an officer first, and then I want to tell that story briefly because what happened as an officer isn't too important. I'd rather get into moving on the West 6th Street and so forth. Now, Fort Sill was an Indian reservation at one time, and Geronimo was there, and we had a big swimming pool, and it was hot, and it was sandy, but it was the same routine as 4th grade, and we were in a nice area, and I had the same routine, going back to headquarters and coming there, and it was much the same thing. But they had an officers' school there. They had the field artillery.
And you were still doing postal work.
I was still doing postal work, and I applied for a commission to go to school. I didn't want to go to school. I went before the board. They have a board that determines whether you're qualified or not. Oh, I forgot to mention that I had an exceptionally high IQ, 144 in the Army. And I think they tried to, you had to have 120 to go to OCS, and I had no problem. I passed the board, and I knew I was going to go to field artillery school. This is in August, July or August. And one day, you see, as a regimental mail clerk, I would get in trouble once in a while because some of these sergeants would come in and they want mail and I'm not supposed to have it, and they want me to do them favors, and I wasn't allowed to do favors. I could do certain things and certain things I couldn't do. And every once in a while, somebody would go off in a huff. So one day, this one corporal comes running in, he said, "Lou," he says, "the major wants to see you, and he's mad." I think, I did something, so I go, I knock on the door, and open the door, and he says, he looks at me and he says, "Come in, Lieutenant Geiger," like this. And I think, oh, I really did it. I exceeded my authority. And he takes a piece of paper and he just goes, "Here, read that." He liked me and he didn't like me. He liked me for the work I did, but he didn't like the fact that I didn't drink, I didn't gamble, I didn't mix with the men too much. I minded my own business. And then he still remembered how I was against the war. But once the war started, forget it. We were 100%.
What? You were a pacifist? You were a dove?
No, I wasn't a dove. But I didn't like what was going on. Well, anyway, I read the letter, and it says, "You are hereby commissioned a lieutenant in the Adjutant General's Corps."
Oh, great.
No, first in the, it was in the Ready Reserve, and you will be called to active duty very, very shortly, provided you agree with all the provisions herein. And I had to sign an oath, a few other things, and I read it, and I said, I go like this, and he says, "Yes," he says, "you're a lieutenant."
Great.
Just
Well,
like
that
that.
was wonderful.
And he handed me the paper, and I signed it. And in the meantime, this one corporal, you know how they want, they want to see what I did wrong.
You were in trouble, or what was
That's right.
happening?
No, they wanted to know what I did was so serious. So it comes out, and he couldn't wait to tell everybody. "He's a lieutenant, he's a lieutenant." He walks over to me, and I had PFC stripes, and he reaches over like this, and he's going to tear him up, and he tore my whole sleeve. He got scared. He got scared. He went down to the supply sergeant, and he told me, he said, "Don't say anything, don't say anything." He got me a new shirt.
Oh, that's cute.
But anyway, the Army didn't know how to treat me. I was a second lieutenant on inactive duty and a PFC on active duty. So my captain came to me and he says, what was that noise?
Still coughing. Go ahead.
He says, "I don't know exactly how we're going to handle this." He says, "What are your suggestions?" So facetiously I said to him, I says, "I'll relieve my replacement for his lunch hour." And he laughed and he says, "You know," he says, "that's a good solution." So for not quite a month, I had no life, I had no duties, and I would come in and relieve my replacement.
So you were just waiting for orders to be transferred somewhere?
Orders for active duty. And in the meantime, I had no training now. I didn't know how to act. I had absolutely no training as an officer. So I had to pick up, scratch where I could. And finally, my orders came through. And they were to report to Arkansas, Fort Smith, Arkansas, to the 6th Armored Division.
Not to Little Rock?
Very close. So I went to Fort Smith, and I had a few incidents there which weren't exactly good, because I was a different person then. Then I wasn't afraid to do anything, and when something was wrong, I went after it, and I was a little outspoken and got into trouble. But I met a very fine man there, Lieutenant Borgley, and he took me under his wing. Because when I told him, the first day I reported, I had an adventure getting there too, that I had no training. He said, "Don't worry about it." He says, "I'll take care of you. You look like a nice guy. Besides," he said he went to Notre Dame, and I told him I was a Notre Dame rooter.
Oh, there you go.
So we had something in common. Well, anyway, the 6th Armored Division was on maneuvers then, and when they returned, they went out to the Mojave Desert. And I went on the first contingent out there. And when I got out there, I had quite an adventure the first day there. And it's something that came up later, but I'll have to tell you about that because that's much too lengthy. Well, anyway, when I got there, I knew I was going to have orders, and everybody knew that I was only there on special duty, temporary duty. And they get a phone call stating that my secret orders came through on me, and they were shipped them down. And they came in, and they put them in a regimental, in the Armored Division safe. We had a snowstorm that night, and the sand got into the safe, and they couldn't open the safe, and there are my secret orders in there.
Oh, boy.
How did Stan see?
So the commander then said, he says, well, there's only one thing we can do, the colonel. He says, I'm going to send you with a military, I didn't hear it.
How did sand get into the safe during the snowstorm?
Sandstorm.
Oh, in Arkansas.
You have no, this is in the Mojave Desert. I've been out there already. Well, anyway, they sent me to Palm Springs with the safe, with a driver, and with an MP under arms to crack the safe, open the safe. And I was never to let the safe cracker get out of my safe. So I go in there, and he opened the safe. And then he locked it. He gave me the combination, and he said it was all right. He cleared the sand out, and then I came back. But this took place for a delay of around 3 or 4 days. And finally, when I got back, and they opened the orders, my orders were to go to New Orleans within 5 days, 6 days or so. So I requested a delay in travel so I could go home and get married. And in the meantime, I had told your mother about getting the commission and going out there, but they wouldn't give it to me. They wouldn't give me the delay in route. So I went to New Orleans, and from New Orleans, I found out there we were a group of, I think, 10 postal officers that were going, and after we got aboard ship, the one fellow there told us, he says, we were bound for North Africa. But he says they changed the orders. He knew. He was in headquarters in New York when all the when the orders came in. He says, we're going to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, Jamaica, the Virgin Islands,
right, because they were afraid that they were going to get attacked. That was the first
they were going
place
to
in
Germany.
the Atlantic Ocean.
Right, we're going to go through there. Well, anyway, we landed in Puerto Rico. And
when was this now?
This Thanksgiving Day, 1942.
Now, what was Puerto Rico in those days? Was it
Territory then?
No, it was a possession.
Possession.
Well, it's almost the same thing. Well, anyway, when we get to Puerto Rico, and everybody gets off the vessel, we lined up our luggage on the side, and somehow our transportation was a little bit late. And one fellow points out and he says, hey, look at that hole. There's a hole around this big, around a foot off the water line. We had been hit with a torpedo.
Yeah, from where?
New Orleans was called Torpedo Junction. And the German submarines were out there and just knocking off ship after ship. And I verified this later from the mail claims we had.
Wow.
And then one fellow says, remember that night when the whole ship rocked? Well, I was seasick all the way over. I didn't remember it. Well, anyway, they gave us a quick orientation in Puerto Rico for maybe a week, and then they gave us assignments. And you had to get up and tell what your assignment was in civilian life. And some of these fellows were superintendents, others had the jobs for years and years, and I get up and I say, I was a substitute clerk in a safe second-class post office in South Plainfield. Everybody laughed. So they gave me one of the easiest assignments on the whole island. But the dummies, they didn't realize that the Army Postal Service was a duplicate of a second-class post office. I knew how to do everything. And some of these fellows that did nothing to handle money orders or supervise people, they were stuck. So I was only there around a week when I got an inspection from a captain. Then I get another inspection 3 days later. Then I get another inspection. And there were many things that happened there in Puerto Rico the first 2 months or so that I didn't realize. And then finally, one man comes down, he says, Geiger, he says, how the hell did you do it? He says, you're the only one on the whole island that's got this thing set up the way it's supposed to be. So I said, hey, this was my post office back home. Well, anyway, I was only in Henry Barracks, and I had quite an experience in Henry Barracks for around a month. For 2 months, I got a promotion. They made me a first lieutenant, which was unheard of. But then the colonel had to take it away because you had to be commissioned for 6 months.
Okay.
Well, I pulled a smart one there. Well, I better not get into that too. How I made good friends with him. I got transferred to the hottest post office on the island in San Juan, because San Juan Army Post Office was a mess, and the man there couldn't handle it. He was a supervisor, foreman of carriers somewhere, and all he knew was how to
Do carriers.
that's right, a letter carrying. And the other intricacies, he didn't follow up on. Claims were piled this high. They were handling money. Oh my God, it was awful. And I straightened that office out in no time at all. And I had a very good relationship in Puerto Rico. Then I had my appendix out. I had an awful appendix attack. And then after I'm skipping an awful lot what I should mention. Then in Puerto Rico, morale was bad. There was nothing to do. Men were getting drunk. They were going AWOL. And as I mentioned to Joycee earlier, they had a hospital for these prostitutes that were that had venereal disease, and these men were jumping the walls to go in there for no reason at all. It's just that everything. If the war going on, there was nothing to do. So Eleanor Roosevelt decided. They sent her on a tour of all the islands, a goodwill tour and a morale tour, and she came back. She said that, wait a minute, she says, after 18 months on that island, that's enough. Either they get sent back or they get a leave of, after 1 year, they can get a leave for 6 months. No, a leave of absence for a month. Whatever time they can go back to the States. So we didn't draw lots. Each unit was allowed 1 officer and 2 enlisted men, each APO, and there were around 10 APOs. Well, I was around 5th or 6th on the list in the seniority to go, and 5 men or 6 men, whatever it was before me, declined to go because it was January. They didn't want to go because of the weather. They didn't want to go home. They thought, what am I going to do in that cold climate? I'm used to a hot climate. So when they called me up, I said, book me. So I went home, and I sent your mother an airmail special delivery telling her that I was coming home on a certain date and to make arrangements. And I got home with a little bit of a misadventure.
Did Colonel Campbell help in getting to Puerto Rico or something?
No, nothing to do with it. No, this was all on the up and up. That came later on, which I'm going to skip that part of it. I got home, and Nanny had 1 week to send the invitations out, to book a place, to get everything ready, and she did it. What an organizer. I don't care who you find, you're never going to find a person that could organize and do it with such detail and such precision and without crossing any, without hurting anybody's feelings. She did it. And I took your mother to Newark. That's where she bought the wedding gown. And Frank and Jean Weckerman, they came along. Of course, Carolyn gave me her car at my disposal. And then we were married. We had a rehearsal, and there was another adventure then too. I better put that in. On my way home from the rehearsal, this is around midnight on a Friday night, there's a black man hitchhiking a ride in Somerville. Well, I had been befriended by hitchhikers, by drivers. So I stopped. I felt sorry for the man. Then he got into the car, and I started to talk to him, and he was drunk. And he fell asleep in the car. Well, what am I going to do with him? He said he was going to Plainfield. So I drive down Plainfield Avenue and 5th Street and 4th Street. You remember what the neighborhood that was? And I stopped the car. There was a signal light there. I don't remember what. I stopped the car. I got out, took the black man out, dragged him out. He was fast asleep and just propped him up against the door, sitting down, got in the car and sped away. But that was dumb. That was dumb. Because anybody could have seen me doing that, even though I was dressed up in a...
thought you robbed him or something.
That's right. They wouldn't have known. Or they thought the other way around. I robbed his car.
Well, so anyway, so this was the night before you got married?
The night before I got married. And then the wedding went on very well.
Where was the reception?
At Raritan Valley Inn.
Where was the wedding?
The wedding was well, it wasn't Immaculata then. It was the church.
Now, who was there?
All the Weckermans, all the Weckerman friends, And on my side, we didn't have that many people because my friends were in service.
Yeah, that's true.
That's only Bud McCarthy was there, and the post office gang, Johnny Graff and Bill Keating. Now,
Who was your best man?
the best man was supposed to be Uncle Joe, but it was Frank, because Uncle Joe was in service.
And
And
who was the maid
the
of honor?
bridesmaid was Josephine. I have a picture of that. But anyway, what I was going to say, and I don't want to break my friend of thought, because, oh yes, Bill Keating had a movie camera. And colored film had just come out on the market, and he couldn't buy it here in the States. But I got it in Puerto Rico, and I brought it home with me, and I gave it to him. And he got a new camera to celebrate, and he was going to take our wedding pictures. And somebody from the family, Mary's family, and somebody from my side, stood next to him and told him just who to take and what to do. And boy, what a beautiful job he did. From the waist down.
Oh, no.
It was a new camera, and somehow it was from the waist up. It was from the waist down.
Waist up wouldn't be so bad.
No, it was the waist down. And the whole film was spoiled. But Johnny Graff played second fiddle. And he also had a movie camera. So he says, what the heck, I've got my camera here.
Thank
I'm
God.
going to take pictures.
Because
And
I
he
remember seeing some.
that's the one that, but his were impromptu.
Yeah,
They
so
weren't posed.
sometimes they're nicer.
And they were nicer. It's a classic. You've seen those.
Sure.
Well, anyway, we honeymooned in
Where's your honeymoon?
Asbury Park because you couldn't go far with gas
right,
rations.
exactly.
And I
You didn't have
borrowed
that much
Carolyn's
time.
car, and Joe Borai, he got me coupons for gas.
Oh, that was
But
nice.
the story there was, I couldn't thank Nanny enough for the way she handled that wedding and the reception. And I met all their friends, and then of course we came back and did a lot of visiting, and I had to go back to Puerto Rico.
How long were you home altogether?
I had 30 days,
30 days.
and I stayed 31. They called me on it. It was a mistake in calculation. But anyway, I came home, and then of course
Mommy stayed and lived in Somerville,
Mommy
right?
lived in Somerville, and she was pregnant. And
You
then
didn't know that then.
no, but then in June, my 18 months was up,
Okay.
and I applied for reassignment back to the States, and I got it.
Where did you go then?
Well, that's when that Colonel incident came up.
Okay.
I'm going to skip all that because,
Where did you find out Mommy was pregnant?
well, in April, I guess.
In April.
When January, February, and March, I guess.
Did she write to you, I guess? She
Yeah.
was the only way she could tell
That's
you,
the
right?
only way she could tell. And she worked up until I think May or June, and then of course, then I got back into the States, and there was a lot of problems I had there, which I mentioned to you at dinner, but I'm not going to relate.
Where did
now.
you go in the States?
Well, the first place I went was Long Island, and then from Long Island to Camp Shanks to I went home, and then from home I was on leave for around 10 days or so, and then I had to report to Camp Putnam, North Carolina. That's when I had the problems, and I went to Lake Placid, and from Lake Placid I went to the New York Port of Embarkation for reassignment, and it was while I was there that Jerry was born. And there was there's a riotous incident that had two of them that happened there, but I got out of it. And
Well,
then
tell
I
us
was
about
home.
Jerry's birth.
I was home when Jerry was born. In fact, the night Teresa Hope, or Marion Hope, took her to the hospital, and I was there that night, and I took all the Weckemans over, but Jerry wasn't born. And then we got home. I was sleeping in that little couch down there, and the doctor called me.
Okay.
And then we all went the next day.
You might turn it off.
The story of Jerry's birth.
Okay. All right.
And that was wonderful, but
Well, tell about Mommy, how you got there. And
well, no, I did already.
Yeah,
Marion
okay.
Hope took her, and she had the best room in the hospital, right in the penthouse. It was a doctor's.
How did she get that room?
A doctor reserved it, but his wife wasn't due, so she got it.
Oh, how lovely.
And I was the first one to give Jerry her bottle, because I arrived just as.
How did you pick the name Jerry? Geraldine.
Geraldine, we picked. We had a problem with that too, and we had to change that to Jerry because Mommy had some other name picked, and nobody liked it. So then we settled on Jerry because of the Geiger sound, Jerry Geiger. Geraldine Geiger went along good, and we didn't want to name him. Well, there would have been another Mary, and for some reason they didn't want Elizabeth. Neither of us wanted to name it after anybody. So Jerry was just a good name. There was another reason for it, but anyway, I didn't bring Mommy home from Jerry home from the hospital. I had to go back.
You had to go back. And where were you then?
I was en route to. No, I was at the New York Port of Embarkation.
Oh, so you weren't far then.
No, New York. I was commuting.
Right. Oh, okay.
And no, I came home and I had Carolyn's car. Then I went to Indiana to Camp Atterbury, Indiana.
How much longer did you have in the service?
Almost a year and a half. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, I had quite in October, a little over a year, and then finally I had many problems there at Camp Atterbury, Indiana. But it was close. I never came home on furlough. I was saving my time because when the atom bomb blew up the Japanese, it was all over.
Sure.
And then I came home in 45 in the December 45. I got out and we started house hunting immediately. And Poppy was indispensable. He came to every house that we liked, and there are a couple of houses that I'm glad we didn't buy. There was one way down by Maxon School. There was one in South Plainfield, which would have been nice.
Why did you pick Plainfield?
Your mother liked Plainfield.
She didn't want to live in Somerville.
No. Well, Somerville would have been awkward for me in the post office.
Oh, that's
true.
That was a little car.
I was only buying a car.
So you had your job was waiting for you back in South Plainfield post
Yes,
office.
still as a sub.
Oh, still only as a sub.
Only as a sub. And there were many problems there also.
Did you think about getting another job, or you knew that's what you wanted?
I was disgusted. No, I wanted to stay in there because, see, while I was at Camp Atterbury, I impressed the chief inspector at Atterbury. I always wanted to be an inspector. Now, an inspector was the highest job anybody in a post office could get without being a political appointment. And I had it in my hands. The man called me up when he knew I was going to get out. He says, Lou, he said, I did him quite a favor. He says, we have a vacancy here in this area. And he says, all you have to do is pass an exam and get a mark of 70. And he says, you had to declare your party, a Democrat or a Republican. And he says, I've got an opening in both parties. And he says, in fact, he says, he didn't tell you which party is open. And he says, you've got the job. So I talked it over with your mother. Well, with Jerry just being born, she didn't want to travel out to, it would have been Indiana, Ohio, or Kentucky. I didn't know where I was going to be assigned. Nobody knew. So she said no. So I went back to South Plainfield post office. But the idea was to find a home with in Plainfield. So then we settled on the two-family house, a double house, Poppy would call it. And he loved it. And that house needed work.
Now, how old were you now?
Now I was 1945. I was 30.
30.
30 or 31, depending on
how old was Mommy? She was a year younger, right?
Two years younger, so she was 28. Well, anyway, keep asking questions. Anyway, we bought the house in
what did you pay for it?
$5,500.
$5,500.
And that was high in those days. But I had no problem getting a mortgage because I had saved money. I sent money home from your mother. I gave her an allotment as soon as I got commission.
I see.
And she was getting $100 a month or something like that. Something like that.
Oh yeah, what did she make as a secretary?
$50, $40 a week or something like that.
$40 a week?
She made, yeah, well, that was good money then.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was very good money, yeah.
But anyway, but she didn't work.
No, she couldn't work.
She couldn't work.
Well, she worked until Jerry was, until she got pregnant?
Yeah, she worked until then. But anyway, we bought that house on West 60, and Poppy just loved to come over. That's how he got the nickname, the Boss Man. Because Joey wanted to know how he got that nickname. For one thing, I was reluctant to call him Pop.
Okay, well,
I didn't want anybody to call me that either.
Okay.
And then,
that's okay.
So he got the nickname Boss Man because he would tell these fellas that he owed him favors. Saturday, Sunday, we're going over the Geiger house.
827.
27 and paint, hang paper, or doing it. He got the tile man there. He got this. Well, he didn't get Eric. Did a lot of the plumbing that had to be done. He got the painters to help him. Uncle Joe came, and boy, we painted that house from top to bottom. We had to burn the paint off, and your mother just loved that neighborhood.
Yeah, the neighbors and...
Yeah. Well, that's, wait a minute, that's the, that's as far as we're going to go.
Okay.
How much time to go?
6 minutes.
6 minutes. Well, then I can come back on the...
Sure, whatever you want to talk about. Mom.
A few of the, with Mommy. I gave her a ring on that leave right after Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
We went to Del Garner's jewelry store in Plainfield, and we bought the ring. And there was a brief item in the paper. And, you know, everything was very compatible. And, of course, there were very few friends around then. They were all in service. And I wasn't home too long on that furlough. I had a choice of Christmas and New Year's to take my vacation. Didn't have vacation, go on furlough. That was when I was at Fort Bragg. And I chose New Year's. Because at Christmas, there'd be too much activity around. And I knew we were going to get engaged, and I didn't want to interfere with that.
Sure.
So it was December the 29th that we got engaged, or right around that time, just before New Year's. And of course, see, Mike Kafka was not in service, so I always had Mike to fall back on. And I think that New Year's Eve, we went to the Liberty Theater. And then we went home, and I drove her home. But let me think, there was a few other little incidents that happened during our during that part. But still,
She wrote to you every day?
almost that. Well, just about every day that she could. It was an imposition, and she
You
should.
knew how important mail was.
Yes, she
Did
did.
you get all her letters?
Oh, did I? And I told her to use a certain color envelope.
Oh, that was smart. You could pick them right
Because
out.
she could pick it, I could pick it right out. But see, this was from experience, because in the post office later on, there was a company that had that problem. They had to have certain prices come in, and when mail comes in piles like this, and they needed that, hey, until you get to the bottom of the pile,
Sure,
that
you
was,
don't know.
but this way, if he had a certain type of envelope, and I told him to order it with stripes on it, I could reach right and pull it out for him.
Sure.
And oh, he appreciated that. Well, this is the sort of thing that I did in the Army. But anyway, maybe I'll tell a story how...
I'm going to pause for a second.
Well,
All right, you back on.
You don't make so much noise in the background, because the camera, especially you sitting at the...
when we, during the courtship, I played cards with a lot of Frank's friends. They used to play a lot of cards in. That was another thing. Your mother was they played a lot of pinochle. Pinochle in Somerville. But the pinochle I played was a lot faster than their pinochle. See, when I played pinochle, I could memorize every card, and I could add up the value of all the cards, and I would bid a certain amount and just make it. But since then, I have no desire to play cards, and they played a lot of poker. I didn't care to play poker. There was a
Mommy
lot.
played poker?
No.
Oh, I didn't.
No. There was a lot of poker playing going on in the Army, and her friends got married at the same time, and all had babies. Carolyn had a baby, Billy Helmer,
That's
and
right.
Ronnie. Ronnie was
Right,
Gene and Frank, and one more, Priscilla, her sister. Her sister had a baby at that time too.
Oh,
And no, it was nice because then they were all together. And the way Nanny took to Jerry, and Jerry took to them, even as a little baby. See, I came home, when I came home from service, I came home on her, just right after her birthday. And one of her first words was, Daddy.
That's cute.
Your mother had coached her.
That's cute.
That was cute. And Jerry, the first year in Somerville, just won over everybody.
Oh, I bet she was spoiled.
But she was that kind of baby. She was a spoiled baby who wouldn't let herself be spoiled. And she was very, very responsive. And oh, when Nanny would give her her bath, she would love it. And she just ran the whole house.
Oh, I bet.
revolved
She did.
around
Oh,
her.
because Rita was home? Or Rita?
No,
Doris?
Rita was in
Josephine?
service.
Right,
Rita was in service.
And your mommy, Nanny?
Joe was in service also.
Uh-huh.
And Joe got sick when I was home as a lieutenant.
Yeah.
And he was in a hospital at Camp Kilmer. And in fact, I had them send an ambulance down. I called up, I knew who to call, and they sent an ambulance down to take him to Camp Kilmer, to the hospital.
Army hospital.
Yeah, and then he had pneumonia or bronchitis, something of that sort, and we went to see him there. But see, he was supposed to be our, maybe that's why he couldn't come to be the best man. No, he was being transferred somewhere. He had it rough. He got into a tank outfit later on. That I might mention later on. But then I got to know all the Weckerman friends. And we got along swell. Joe Schweitzer, Adam Deal, and Huffy, all the painters. And they had painter jokes.
Oh, at that.
And but there was one and only boss man on the job. Boy, he was tough. But as soon as that whistle blew, he was all fun. And they all, many people told me that. They said, that Adolf, he's one of a kind. He had the greatest personality. He was charisma all over. Something like Janie has a lot of that. He could make friends with anybody, and he could kid. He's the kind of a guy that could walk over and say, hey, that's a dumb-looking dress you got on, and get away with it. And somebody could come over and say, hey, there's a little wrinkle on this, and you'd be offended. But not him, not the way he would say it. I remember once in church, he said to this woman, boy, that's the dumbest hat I ever saw. And everybody laughed, even the woman, because he's coming from Adolf. That was something.
You just had that personality.
But again, Mattie's the one that ran that family.